For centuries, they've remained hidden, swallowed by jungle, entombed beneath desert sands, perched on cliffs no road has ever reached. Monuments to civilizations that rose, flourished, and vanished, leaving behind only stone, silence, and questions we have barely learned to ask. What were they building? And why? What knowledge did they carry that we lost somewhere between their age and ours? Join us for the next 3 hours as we journey across 6 continents, 22 of the most enigmatic sites on Earth, and into the very depths of human mystery. This is a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. The answers, as you will discover, are far more elusive and far more extraordinary than you ever imagined. The steppe rolls out in every direction, vast and golden, an ocean of dry grass that seems to breathe in the wind. The sky here is enormous, impossibly blue in summer, bruised and heavy with cloud in winter, and it presses down on the land with an intimacy that makes you feel both exposed and very small. To the north, the jagged spine of the Tian Shan Mountains rises like a fortress wall, their snow-capped peaks glittering even in the heat of afternoon. There are no trees, there are no sounds but the wind, and yet, from this emptiness, there rises a tower. This is Burana Tower, located in the Chui Valley of northern Kyrgyzstan, not far from the ancient city of Balasagun, a settlement that once stood at the pulsing heart of the Silk Road. The tower is estimated to have been built sometime in the 10th or 11th century CE, and it is all that remains of a minaret that, at its peak, may have soared to a height of nearly 45 meters. Today, erosion and the merciless passage of time have reduced it to roughly 24 meters, yet it remains imposing, a cylindrical column of fired brick, rising from the flat valley floor with a deliberateness that feels almost defiant. It is, by any measure, one of the most significant Islamic structures ever raised in Central Asia, and one of the oldest surviving minarets in the region. What baffles researchers is not the tower's survival, remarkable as that is, but the city it once served. Balasagun was, by all historical accounts, a major urban center of the Karakhanid Khanate, a Turkic Islamic dynasty that controlled much of Central Asia between the 9th and 13th centuries. The city was described by medieval travelers as prosperous, populous, and sophisticated, and yet beneath the grass of the Chui Valley, almost nothing has been found. The city is gone. The population is gone. Even the ruins, apart from the tower and a scattering of carved stone funerary markers called balbuls, have largely vanished. How does a city of such significance simply disappear? And why does only the tower remain? The Karakhanids were among the first Turkic peoples to convert to Islam, doing so in the early 10th century in what historians regard as one of the most consequential religious transformations in Central Asian history. Their cities were centers of scholarship, trade, and artisanship, connected to the wider Islamic world through the arteries of the Silk Road. Balasagun is believed to have been one of their earliest capitals, a city where the poet Yusuf Kas Hajib composed his masterwork, the Kutadgu Bilig, Wisdom that Brings Happiness, in 1069 CE. The Karakhanids built mosques, madrasas, and markets with the confidence of a civilization that expected to endure. Some scholars propose that the city was devastated by the Mongol invasions of the 13th century when the armies of Genghis Khan swept through Central Asia with a thoroughness that erased entire urban landscapes from the map. The prevailing theory suggests that what could not be burned was plundered, and what could not be plundered simply ceased to be maintained. crumbling back into the earth over the centuries that followed, its fired bricks robbed for new construction by the generations that came after. The tower, being both massive and symbolic, may have been too large to dismantle and too striking to ignore. Others suggest that the tower's survival is not merely accidental but deeply intentional, that the minaret was understood even by those who came after as a sacred vertical axis, a physical needle connecting earth and sky, and that no conqueror, however thorough, could bring themselves to pull it down. Perhaps this was a conduit to something greater than conquest. In the Islamic tradition, the minaret is a place from which the call to prayer ascends, a voice between the human and the divine, and its height was itself an expression of spiritual ambition, the desire to be heard not just across the valley, but across the cosmos. Could it be then that what preserved the Barana Tower was not practical accident, but a kind of architectural reverence that transcended even the violence of the Mongol incursion? Some researchers even wonder whether the tower served purposes beyond the purely religious, whether it functioned as a watchtower, a navigation landmark for Silk Road caravans, or a territorial symbol whose meaning outlasted the dynasty that raised it. The balbals that surround it, carved stone figures of pre-Islamic Turkic warriors, suggest a layering of belief systems at this site that may complicate any single explanation. Who gave the order to build it? What prayers rose from its summit into the Kyrgyz sky? Why did the city around it disappear so completely while the tower endured? Is the absence of the city itself the deeper mystery, or does the answer lie in some catastrophe we have not yet identified? And what became of the thousands of people who once filled Balasagun's markets, mosques, and streets? As you stand at the base of Barana Tower and press your hand against its ancient brick, you feel not just the roughness of fired clay, but the weight of an absence, the ghostly outline of a city that once breathed and hummed and prayed, and that the earth has quietly swallowed whole. Barana Tower stands as a testament to the strange selectivity of time, which preserves some things with exquisite care and destroys others without explanation. The story of this tower is not the story of what survived. It is the story of everything that did not. As we leave the windswept steppe of Kyrgyzstan behind, we journey now thousands of miles south and east into the lush, humid density of Southeast Asia, where the jungle has a different relationship with ruins, not erasing them, but embracing them, pressing roots into stone and vines through windows, as if reclaiming what was once given. The air is thick here, warm and saturated with moisture, fragrant with the sweetness of decomposing vegetation and the clean green edge of moss. Ancient trees arch overhead, their roots erupting from the red earth in great curved buttresses, and between their trunks, filtered light falls in shifting columns through a canopy so dense it turns noon to amber. The silence, when the birds fall still, is absolute. Then, through the trees, you see it. Stone, old stone, draped in lichens and half swallowed by roots, rising from the forest floor with the quiet authority of something that has been waiting a very long time. This is Thma Bay Kayak, a Khmer temple complex located in the forested regions of Cambodia, its origins reaching back to the era of the great Angkorian civilization, one of the most powerful and sophisticated empires of medieval Southeast Asia, which dominated the region from roughly the 9th to the 15th century CE. Unlike the grand ceremonial complexes of Angkor Wat or Bayon, Thma Bay Kayak is a smaller, more intimate site, its sandstone structures worn smooth by centuries of tropical rain, its carvings blurred at the edges but still unmistakably deliberate. It is, in the vocabulary of Cambodian archaeology, a secondary temple. Yet the questions it raises are anything but secondary. What perplexes researchers who have studied this site is the character of its iconographic program. The complex layered arrangement of carved figures and symbols that decorate its lintels, pediments, and doorways. Certain motifs appear here that deviate subtly but meaningfully from the standard Angkorian decorative vocabulary, suggesting either a distinct regional tradition, an unusually creative workshop of craftsmen, or perhaps a different religious orientation from the norm. The most perplexing element is the presence of carved figures that do not correspond cleanly to either the Hindu or Buddhist iconographic systems that typically governed Khmer temple art. Who authorized these departures, and were they the expression of a local cult, an independent theological tradition, or something older and stranger still? The Khmer Empire at its height was a civilization of extraordinary organizational power, capable of mobilizing tens of thousands of workers to construct hydraulic systems, road networks, and temple complexes of a scale unmatched anywhere in the medieval world. Their religious life was syncretic, blending Indian Brahmanical traditions with local animist beliefs and, later, Theravada Buddhism into a cosmological worldview in which the temple was literally a model of the universe. The central tower representing Mount Meru, the axis of all creation around which gods and mortals alike were organized in precise hierarchical relationship. Every carving, every measurement, every alignment was theologically charged. Some scholars propose that temples like Thma Bay Kayak were local dedications funded by regional elites, lords or administrators who held territory under the Angkorian umbrella but maintained their own devotional priorities, commissioning temple programs that reflected personal belief, dynastic legitimacy, or the veneration of local protective spirits known as Nik Ta. The prevailing theory suggests that the variation in iconography at such secondary sites simply reflects the decentralized nature of religious patronage within the Khmer system, where official cosmology provided the framework but local taste filled in the details. Others suggest that the anomalous carvings at Thma Bay Kayak point to something more profound, that they could have been a symbolic representation of a theological position that challenged or at least complicated the dominant state religion. Perhaps this was a conduit to a pre-Angkorian belief system, a survival of older Austroasiatic spiritual traditions that the Brahmanical overlay never fully suppressed. The forest itself may have been theologically significant, a liminal space between the cultivated world of the rice plain and the wild, uncontrolled domain of the spirits. Could it be that certain temples were deliberately placed in the forest not merely for practical reasons, but as sacred gestures toward the wilderness, toward whatever powers lived in the untamed spaces between human settlements? Some even wonder if the smaller, more remote temple complexes of the Angkorian periphery preserve traces of a religious life far older and more diverse than the grand monuments at the center of the empire suggest. Was Thma Bay Kayak a shrine, a hermitage, a political statement, or something that defies all three categories? What rituals were performed here in this dim green light? Who carved these unfamiliar figures, and what stories did they tell? Why were certain temples positioned in the deep forest rather than at the center of populated settlements? What knowledge did the craftsmen of the Khmer periphery carry that their more celebrated colleagues at Angkor did not? Thma Bay Kayak stands as a testament to the depth of what remains unknown, even about civilizations we believe we have studied thoroughly. The great monuments of Angkor have drawn generations of scholars, yet it is precisely in places like this, smaller, quieter, less celebrated, that the most unsettling questions sleep. The story of Thmebe Kaik is far from over. The forest keeps its secrets with a patience no archaeologist has yet managed to outlast. From the humid forest of Cambodia, we travel now northwest, crossing the Indian Ocean and the expanse of the Arabian Peninsula to arrive at one of the most celebrated and most paradoxical monuments of the ancient world, standing beneath the blazing sun of the Egyptian desert. The cliffs are white in the morning light, blinding, almost incandescent, their limestone faces scored by millennia of sun and wind into a surface that seems to radiate rather than merely reflect. The valley floor is the color of pale sand, utterly still, without vegetation or moisture or any softness at all. This is Deir el-Bahari, on the west bank of the Nile, opposite Luxor, and as you stand at its edge and look south, three great colonnaded terraces rise from the desert in perfect horizontal symmetry against the vertical drama of the cliffs behind them. Nothing in the ancient world quite prepares you for this. The mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, known in ancient Egyptian as Djeser-Djeseru, the Holy of Holies, was built by and for one of ancient Egypt's most extraordinary rulers, Hatshepsut, the fifth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, who reigned from approximately 1479 to 1458 BCE. As a woman who declared herself pharaoh and donned the regalia of masculine kingship, including the ceremonial false beard, Hatshepsut broke every convention of the world she governed. Her temple, designed by her chief architect Senenmut and carved directly into the cliffs of the Theban necropolis, is considered one of the greatest architectural achievements of the ancient world, a structure of such formal perfection that it appears to have been not built but revealed, as if the mountain had always contained it. What baffles Egyptologists is not the temple's beauty, but what happened to it after Hatshepsut's death. Approximately 2 decades after her passing, her stepson and successor Thutmose III ordered a systematic effort to erase her from the historical record. A campaign of damnatio memoriae that involved chiseling her image from reliefs, smashing her statues, filling her cartouches with plaster, and replacing her name with his own. Yet the erasure was incomplete, inconsistent, and in many cases clearly half-hearted, as though those carrying it out could not bring themselves to fully destroy what they had been ordered to destroy. Why was a reigning pharaoh, one of ancient Egypt's most successful rulers, subjected to this posthumous obliteration? And why did the effort stop short of completion? Hatshepsut's reign was, by any measurable standard, successful. She launched ambitious trade expeditions to the land of Punt, depicted in exquisite painted reliefs within the temple itself, reliefs that constitute some of the most detailed records of foreign trade in all of Egyptian history. She commissioned more monuments and statuary than any previous female ruler, restored temples that had fallen into disrepair, and oversaw a period of considerable prosperity. Her temple functioned not only as a funerary monument, but as a complex religious center, housing shrines to Amun, Hathor, and Anubis, and serving as the endpoint of the Great Opet Festival procession. Some scholars propose that Thutmose III's erasure campaign was motivated by straightforward political calculation, that by eliminating Hatshepsut from the record, he could present his own reign as the uninterrupted continuation of his father Thutmose II's rule, thereby legitimizing a succession that her long regency had complicated. The prevailing theory suggests that the erasure began not immediately after her death, but perhaps 15 to 20 years later, timing that some researchers have connected to the crowning of Thutmose's own son and heir when establishing a clean male lineage would have been politically urgent. Others suggest that the temple's survival, however mutilated, points to a deeper truth about its creator, that Hatshepsut had embedded her identity so thoroughly into the theological fabric of the site that removing her entirely would have been tantamount to demolishing the sanctuary of Amun himself. Perhaps the erasure was not an act of hatred, but of correction, a bureaucratic adjustment to an unprecedented situation, carried out with the reluctance of people who understood that what they were destroying was sacred. Could a structure encode the power of its creator in such a way that the creator becomes impossible to fully remove? Could it be that Hatshepsut had designed Djeser not merely as a monument to herself, but as a theological argument, a physical claim, in stone and paint and perfectly aligned geometry, that a woman could stand before the gods on equal terms with any man? Some even wonder whether her choice of this particular site, adjacent to the tomb of an earlier Middle Kingdom pharaoh, was a deliberate act of architectural precedent-setting. Was she building a temple or a legacy? Was she speaking to her contemporaries or to history itself? Why was her erasure so incomplete? What did those who chiseled away her face feel as they did so? Is there still more hidden within the temple's walls, inscriptions plastered over, reliefs turned face inward that might yet restore something of what was lost? And what did it mean, in a civilization as rigidly hierarchical as ancient Egypt, to be both erased and unforgettable? Djeser stands as a testament to the impossibility of true erasure. The idea that a human being can build something so perfectly realized, so spiritually charged, that it outlasts every attempt to unmake them. Hatshepsut was removed from the record. She was reinscribed by time. The story of her temple is the story of how stone remembers what history tries to forget. We leave Egypt now, crossing the Red Sea and the Indian subcontinent, climbing northward toward the great rocky plateau of central India, where a fortress rises from a hill that has witnessed the passage of empires, armies, and centuries with equal, indifferent majesty. The rock is dark here, almost black in the shadow of a cloud, and it rises from the surrounding plain with the blunt authority of something that was not constructed, but simply pushed through the earth from below. Thorny scrub clings to the lower slopes, giving way to bare stone as the hill steepens, and at the summit, walls of extraordinary thickness trace the contour of the escarpment like a second skin. The Vindhya Mountains stretch away in every direction, layered in haze, and the air carries the dry mineral scent of stone that has been warmed and cooled for longer than anyone can measure. Kalinjar Fort crowns an isolated hill in the Banda district of Uttar Pradesh in north-central India, and it is one of the oldest and most enigmatic fortresses on the subcontinent. Its name derives from Sanskrit, Kala meaning time and Jara meaning destroyer, giving Kalinjar an identity as the destroyer of time, or the conqueror of death, an epithet deeply connected to the Hindu deity Shiva, whose presence at this site is ancient, persistent, and profound. The fort has been occupied and contested for more than 3,000 years, passing through the hands of the Chandela Rajputs, the Delhi Sultanate, the Mughals under Babur, and the British East India Company. Yet beneath its medieval walls lies a much older layer, a layer of rock-cut temples, inscriptions, and sacred imagery that predates any of its known rulers. What baffles archaeologists at Kalinjar is not the fort's military history, but the extraordinary density of sacred rock carvings within and around its walls. images of Shiva in various forms, tantric diagrams, astronomical symbols, and inscriptions in scripts ranging from early Brahmi to medieval Devanagari. Among the most perplexing discoveries is a series of large rock-cut reliefs depicting Shiva as Nilakantha, the god with the blue throat, who drank the cosmic poison churned from the primordial ocean to save the universe. The iconography is elaborate, the execution masterful, and the location, carved not into a temple, but directly into the living rock of the hilltop, suggests a religious practice of considerable antiquity. What was the precise nature of the cult practiced here, and how far back does the sacred occupation of this hill truly extend? Kalinjar's significance in the Hindu sacred geography is ancient and layered. The hill is mentioned in the Mahabharata and is regarded in some traditions as one of the spots where Shiva danced his cosmic dance, the Tandava. The Chandela dynasty, which controlled the fort from roughly the 9th to the 13th centuries CE, were devoted patrons of Shiva and responsible for much of the surviving iconographic program. The same dynasty that built the spectacular Khajuraho temple complex, whose erotic carvings have made it world famous. For the Chandelas, Kalinjar was not merely a military installation, but a sacred mountain, a place where the divine and the earthly converged with unusual intensity. Some scholars propose that the site's sacred character long preceded its military function, that the hill was venerated as a natural shrine to Shiva for centuries or even millennia before any permanent structure was raised upon it, and that the fort's walls were built around an existing sacred landscape rather than imposing a new one. The prevailing theory suggests that the rock carvings represent multiple phases of devotional activity, each successive dynasty adding to the layers of sacred imagery in an act of both piety and political legitimation. Others suggest that Kalinjar occupies a position in the Indian sacred landscape that goes beyond ordinary temple sites, that it could have been a symbolic representation of Mount Kailash, the mythological Himalayan home of Shiva, transplanted in miniature to the Vindhyan plateau. Perhaps this was a conduit to the divine that rulers across the centuries felt compelled to control, not merely for military reasons, but because possession of the mountain meant, in some cosmic sense, proximity to the god. The destroyer of time does not merely protect those within its walls, it blesses them. Could it be that the rock carvings at Kalinjar represent a continuous sacred tradition stretching back to a pre-Vedic substrate, a time before the formalization of Hindu theology, when the hill itself was worshipped as a living deity? Some even wonder whether the astronomical alignments visible in certain carvings point to a sophisticated knowledge of celestial cycles that predates the known history of the site. Was Kalinjar a fortress, a temple, an observatory, or all three simultaneously? What rituals were performed in the rock-cut caves and shrines of this ancient hill? Who carved the first image of Shiva into the living stone? And in what era? Does the phrase, destroyer of time, encode a specific cosmological concept, a liturgical formula, or a political claim about the power of whoever controlled this place? And what lies beneath the fort's present structure, in the deeper strata of the hill, still unexcavated and unknown? Kalinjar Fort stands as a testament to the extraordinary continuity of sacred geography in South Asia. The way certain places accumulate religious meaning across millennia, each layer of devotion resting upon the one before it, until the rock itself seems to breathe with accumulated reverence. The hill has destroyed time, as its name promises. It has survived everything. The story of Kalinjar is not merely the story of a fort. It is the story of a mountain that has been sacred for longer than memory reaches. From this ancient hill in the heart of India, our journey carries us eastward now, across the breadth of the Indian subcontinent and over the high passes of the Himalayas into a very different kind of architecture, one that turns the concept of the fortress inside out and replaces walls with community. The valley cups the morning mist like a bowl, holding it gently against the terraced hillsides, while the ridgelines above emerge sharp and green against a pale sky. Rice paddies catch the early light in silver rectangles, and bamboo groves sway in a wind too light to feel from a distance. Then, settled into the valley floor, like massive seeds dropped from some great height, appear the roundhouses, enormous, windowless at ground level, their earthen walls the color of old copper, their curved silhouettes so perfect, so deliberate, that they seem less built than grown. These are the Fujian Tulu, the earthen buildings of the Hakka and Minnan peoples of southeastern China's Fujian province, and they represent one of the most ingenious and still poorly understood traditions of communal architecture in the history of human settlement. The surviving Tulu number in the thousands, the most celebrated built between the 12th and 20th centuries CE, and they come in forms both circular and square. The largest circular Tulu can accommodate hundreds of people in a single structure, with rooms arranged in concentric rings around a central open courtyard, the whole enclosed by walls of rammed earth, stone, and wood that rise to heights of 4 or 5 stories. They were listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008, yet despite their fame, fundamental questions about their origin, purpose, and construction remain unresolved. What baffles architectural historians is the extraordinary precision of the circular Tulu's geometry, the fact that structures of such scale, built from rammed earth without the use of metal reinforcement or advanced machinery, achieve near-perfect circularity with walls of remarkably uniform thickness and a structural integrity that has allowed many of them to stand for centuries without significant deterioration. The rammed earth formula used in their construction, a carefully calibrated mixture of earth, sand, lime, brown sugar, and glutinous rice, has been analyzed by modern materials scientists who have found it to possess load-bearing and moisture-resistant properties that remain difficult to fully replicate. Who developed this formula? And through what process of accumulated knowledge did it reach such precision? And why is the circular form so prevalent when the square would have been geometrically simpler to construct? The Hakka people, who built the majority of the circular Tulu, are a Han Chinese subgroup with a complex migratory history, having been displaced from northern China by successive waves of conflict and upheaval. They moved south over the course of many centuries, eventually settling in the mountainous regions of Fujian, Guangdong, and Jiangxi. In their new homeland, they were often in conflict with earlier settled populations, and the Tulu's fortress-like design has traditionally been explained as a response to this chronic insecurity, a communal defense system in which an entire clan could shelter behind walls that could withstand attack, fire, and even artillery. The single, heavily reinforced ground floor entrance and the absence of ground-level windows on the exterior wall make this interpretation compelling. Some scholars propose that the circular form was chosen not merely for its defensive advantages, but for its cosmological resonance, the circle being one of the most universally significant forms in Chinese cosmological thinking, representing heaven, completeness, and the harmonious cycling of all natural processes. The prevailing theory suggests that the Tulu's round plan reflects the Hakka community's deep engagement with feng shui principles, which would have governed the placement, orientation, and proportions of the structure according to the flow of qi through the landscape. Others suggest that the circular tulu could have been a symbolic representation of the cosmos writ small, a self-contained universe in which the central courtyard functioned as the still point around which family life revolved, with each concentric ring of rooms encoding a layer of social and cosmological meaning. Perhaps this was a conduit to a sense of identity and continuity that a displaced and persecuted people desperately needed. Not just a fortress, but a homeland made portable, a piece of ancestral geography that could be reconstructed wherever the Hakka settled. Could it be that the Tulu formula, the specific mixture of earth and organic binders, the precise geometry, the layered construction method, represents a body of technical knowledge so sophisticated that its full understanding has been lost even to the Hakka people themselves? Some even wonder whether the circular Tulu drew inspiration from a still older tradition of communal circular architecture, one whose origins lie not in the Hakka migration, but in a prehistorical building tradition that has left only these magnificent late examples behind. Was this design reinvented or remembered? How did builders without modern surveying instruments achieve the near-perfect circularity of the largest Tulu? What was the social logic that determined who lived in which ring, which floor, which room? Do the proportions of the circular Tulu encode astronomical knowledge? Are they oriented to celestial bodies in ways that have not yet been fully documented? And what happens to this tradition now as the younger generations of Hakka leave the valleys for the cities? The Fujian Tulu stand as a testament to the extraordinary ingenuity of communities under pressure, the way necessity and belief, when combined with deep accumulated knowledge, can produce structures that confound every expectation of what is possible. They are not ruins, they are still inhabited, they are still, in some profound sense, alive. And that makes their mystery not a relic of the past, but a living question in the present. Leaving China's misty valleys behind, we cross the South China Sea and descend through the tropical archipelago of Southeast Asia, touching down on an island where a very different kind of fortification tells a very different story about power, trade, and the long reach of empire. The sea here is impossibly blue, cerulean in the shallows, darkening to indigo where the reef drops away, and the air carries the sharp, resinous sweetness of cloves, that intoxicating scent that once made this island chain the most fought-over real estate on Earth. The coastline is jagged, cut by small bays and volcanic headlands, and coconut palms lean over the water at angles that suggest they have spent centuries accommodating the wind. On a promontory above one such bay, stones stacked with military precision form walls that seem to grow from the rock itself, watching the sea with a vigilance that centuries have not relaxed. Fort Toluco stands on the northern coast of Ternate, one of the small volcanic islands of North Maluku in eastern Indonesia. Islands that were, for more than 3 centuries, the exclusive source of cloves and nutmeg in the global spice trade, and that consequently became the arena for one of history's most brutal and consequential commercial competitions. The fort was originally built in 1540 by the Portuguese, the first Europeans to establish a permanent military presence in the Spice Islands, and it subsequently passed through the hands of the Spanish, the Dutch East India Company, and eventually the Dutch colonial government. Its walls have absorbed the violence of that competition in layers that archaeology is only beginning to untangle. As a physical object, Fort Toluco is a palimpsest of colonial ambition, rewritten by every successive power that held it. What baffles historians of the colonial spice trade is the extraordinary violence that was normalized here, and the degree to which that violence has left traces in the material record of the fort that official documents fail to fully capture. Excavations at and around Toluco have revealed evidence of habitation, storage, and fortification extending to a period before the Portuguese arrival, suggesting that the promontory was understood as a strategically significant site by the Ternatan Sultanate long before European ships appeared on the horizon. The most perplexing discovery is the layered sequence of construction phases, each one erasing and rewriting what came before, making it extraordinarily difficult to identify what is original, what was imposed, and what represents a local response to foreign occupation. Who built the first walls on this headland? And what purpose did they serve before the Europeans transformed the region's entire economic logic? The Sultanate of Ternate was, at the time of Portuguese arrival, one of the most powerful polities in eastern Indonesia, a maritime state whose control over clove production gave it leverage over trade networks that extended from China to the Persian Gulf. The sultans were sophisticated political operators, capable of playing European powers against one another with a strategic acuity that the colonial narratives have systematically undervalued. The island's volcanic soil produced cloves of extraordinary quality, and the Ternatans understood very well what they possessed, demanding tribute, managing production, and forming alliances with a flexibility that kept them relevant even as European military power grew. Some scholars propose that Fort Toluco was built precisely on the site of an existing Ternatan coastal fortification, the Portuguese recognizing and exploiting an already strategically optimized position. The prevailing theory suggests that the successive layers of Dutch construction largely obscured the original Portuguese and pre-European structures, making archaeological reconstruction of the early colonial period exceptionally challenging. The fort as it stands today is, in essence, a Dutch structure that contains the bones of something older. Others suggest that the fort's meaning was never purely military, that it could have been a symbolic representation of European sovereignty over an entire global commodity system, its walls communicating not just military capacity, but the claim of ownership over the most valuable agricultural product in the world. Perhaps this was a conduit through which the economic and political transformation of the early modern world was channeled. A small fort on a small island that, through the cloves grown in the soil around it, reshaped the economies of 4 continents. Could it be that the layers of construction at Fort Toluco encode a history of resistance and accommodation more complex than either colonial or post-colonial narratives have acknowledged? That local labor, local knowledge, and local strategic thinking shaped the fort's evolution in ways that the historical record, dominated by European perspectives, has systematically obscured. Some even wonder whether the pre-European fortification visible in the archaeological record points to a tradition of coastal military architecture in the Maluku Islands that has never been properly studied. What did the Ternatan laborers who built these walls understand about what they were constructing? What negotiations, compromises, and acts of covert resistance occurred within and around the fort that left no written trace? Is there a pre-Portuguese layer of fortification beneath the current structure that would, if properly excavated, rewrite the history of maritime power in eastern Indonesia? And what did the smell of cloves mean to those who lived and died within these walls? Fort Toluco stands as a testament to the way small places can be the hinge points of world history, How an island no larger than a city park can become the stage upon which the global economic order is negotiated, contested, and ultimately transformed. The spice trade is long gone. The fort remains. The questions it asks of us are still being answered. From the island spice trade of Indonesia, we travel now back north and west, returning to Central Asia, to a mountain so sacred that it has been worshipped continuously for thousands of years, a place where geology and theology have become impossible to separate. The mountain rises abruptly from the floor of the Fergana Valley, a limestone massif erupting from the surrounding plain, with the sudden authority of something that refused to be ordinary. Its 5 distinct peaks catch the afternoon light at different angles, throwing shadows that change by the hour, and the lower slopes are worn smooth by an incalculable number of human footsteps. The feet of the devout, the curious, the desperate, and the reverent, all drawn to this place for reasons that archaeology can partially map but never fully explain. You can feel the weight of that accumulated presence. It presses against you like the heat of an old fire. Sulaiman II, Solomon's Mountain in Kyrgyz, rises above the city of Osh in southern Kyrgyzstan and is recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, described as the most complete example of a sacred mountain in Central Asia. It has been a site of veneration for more than 3,000 years, and its sacred identity has been continuously renewed across an extraordinary range of religious traditions: pre-Islamic shamanic practice, Zoroastrianism, the cults of various nomadic peoples, Islam in both its mainstream and Sufi forms, and local syncretic traditions that blend all of the above into something uniquely Central Asian. On its slopes, petroglyphs dating to the Bronze Age coexist with medieval Muslim shrines and 20th century prayer niches carved into the rock. No other site in the region so completely embodies the religious palimpsest of human spiritual history. What baffles archaeologists and religious historians alike is the degree to which Sulaiman II's sacred identity has persisted across the ruptures of religious transformation. How a mountain, venerated by shamanists, continued to be venerated by Muslims, how the same rock, faces that received pre-Islamic petroglyphs, were later understood as the sites of Islamic miracle narratives, how the same springs and caves associated with prehistoric female fertility cults became associated with Bibi Suleiman, a Muslim female saint of uncertain historical origin. The most perplexing discovery is a small cave near the summit that is said to have been used as a retreat by Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, who visited Osh in the early 16th century and described the mountain in his memoirs, the Baburnama, with an intimacy that suggests he understood its sacred character even as a devout Muslim. Why does a mountain consistently absorb the sacred identities of every religion that encounters it? And what is it about this particular limestone massif that has compelled human reverence for so long? Osh is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in Central Asia, its origins reaching back to at least the 3rd millennium BCE, and its position at the intersection of the Silk Road's northern and southern branches made it a place where cultures, languages, and religions met and blended with unusual intensity. Sulaiman II was central to the city's identity, not merely as a religious site, but as a territorial marker. The mountain that defined Osh made it visible from a great distance and connected its inhabitants to a vertical axis of meaning that transcended the horizontal flow of trade and politics. Some scholars propose that the mountain's persistent sacredness is rooted in its unusually prominent topography, that in a region of relatively flat agricultural plains, a prominent limestone outcrop would naturally acquire religious significance as a landmark, a place of vertical differentiation in a landscape of horizontal uniformity. The prevailing theory suggests that each successive religious tradition found in Suleiman II the raw material for its own sacred narratives, projecting its own cosmology onto a site that was already recognized as special. Others suggest that Suleiman II could have been a symbolic representation of the cosmic mountain that appears in nearly every world mythology, the axis mundi, the world mountain around which the cosmos is organized, and that its power to attract religious meaning across millennia derives from this deep structural resonance with the universal human imagination. Perhaps this was a conduit to something that transcends all individual religious traditions, a quality of place that speaks directly to the part of human consciousness that reaches toward the transcendent. Could it be that the mountain possesses physical characteristics, acoustic properties, mineral composition, electromagnetic anomalies, or microclimate effects that have contributed to its sacred reputation in ways that have not yet been scientifically investigated? Some even wonder whether the continuity of veneration at Suleiman II represents not the projection of human meaning onto neutral geology, but the recognition of something genuinely present in this place, something that pre-scientific peoples were more attentive to than we have learned to be. What was the first ritual performed on this mountain, and by whom? What did the people who carved the earliest petroglyphs believe about the rock they were marking? Is there a spiritual geography of Central Asia that Suleiman II anchors in a way that has never been fully mapped? And what does it mean that in a region that has experienced conquest, conversion, and cultural transformation of the most radical kind, this mountain has remained sacred without interruption? Suleiman II stands as a testament to the stubborn persistence of the sacred, the way certain places refuse to be desacralized no matter how many times the dominant religion changes, as if the holiness inheres not in the theology of those who visit, but in the rock itself. The mountain will outlast every faith that claims it. The story of Suleiman II is not the story of any single religion. It is the story of the human need to look up. We descend now from the sacred mountain of Kyrgyzstan and travel southwest, crossing Afghanistan and Pakistan and the great alluvial plain of the Indian subcontinent, to arrive at a site whose darkness and beauty have amazed visitors for more than 1,000 years. The rock face curves like the inside of a crescent, a sweeping arc of basalt above a narrow gorge where a seasonal river runs brown and quick in the monsoon and dries to a thread in the dry season. The cliff is perhaps 75 feet high, darkly striped with mineral seepage, and into its face, at intervals that suggest careful planning rather than geological accident, 29 caves have been cut, their doorways black squares against the dark rock, each one an entrance into a different world. To stand in this gorge and look up at them as the monsoon clouds pile above the Sahyadri hills is to understand immediately that whoever chose this place did so with an eye for the theatrical. The Ajanta Caves, located in the Aurangabad district of Maharashtra in western India, represent one of the most extraordinary ensembles of Buddhist art and architecture anywhere in the world. Carved into the basalt cliff of a horseshoe-shaped gorge over a period spanning roughly the 2nd century BCE to the 6th century CE, the 29 caves comprise both chaitya halls, worship spaces centered on a carved stupa, and viharas, monastic residences. But what distinguishes Ajanta above all is its paintings, wall-to-wall and ceiling-to-ceiling murals executed in rich mineral pigments that, despite 15 centuries of exposure to moisture, light, and biological growth, survive in enough detail to constitute the most complete surviving body of ancient Indian painting in existence. They are, in the most precise sense, irreplaceable. What baffles art historians and conservation scientists equally is the technical virtuosity of the Ajanta paintings. The degree to which the ancient artists achieved effects of luminosity, spatial depth, and psychological complexity using materials and techniques that should, by any conventional analysis, have been incapable of producing such results. The murals depict scenes from the Jataka tales, the lives of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, and episodes from royal court life, all rendered in a style of extraordinary naturalism that seems to belong to a completely different artistic tradition from the formal, hieratic conventions that dominate most ancient art. The faces in the Ajanta paintings breathe. The gestures are specific, individual, alive. Who trained these artists, and in what tradition? And how did they achieve, in the near darkness of a cave, lit only by reflected light, paintings of this complexity and quality? Buddhism in India during the Ajanta period was a complex and rapidly evolving tradition. The earlier caves, dating to the Hinayana period, are austere in their iconography, the Buddha represented symbolically rather than in human form. The later caves, from the Mahayana period of the 5th and 6th centuries CE, are exuberantly figurative, filled with bodhisattvas, celestial beings, and scenes of terrestrial life rendered with an attention to physical beauty and emotional nuance that reflects the Mahayana theological embrace of the world as a sacred arena. The monks who lived and meditated in these caves inhabited an artistic environment of almost overwhelming sensory richness. Some scholars propose that the Ajanta paintings functioned as a form of visual scripture, a means of conveying complex theological narratives to an audience that could not read, using color, gesture, and spatial composition as a language parallel to the written word. The prevailing theory suggests that the artists were members of specialized workshops attached to the Buddhist monastic community, trained in hereditary traditions of painting that no longer survive in any textual or institutional form. Others suggest that the murals could have been a symbolic representation of the Buddha fields, the pure lands described in Mahayana theology, realms of perfect beauty and light toward which the practitioner aspires. Perhaps this was a conduit for meditation, a visual environment so carefully crafted that it could, in the right conditions of concentration and devotion, give the meditating monk a direct experiential sense of the transcendent realms he sought to attain. The cave itself, enclosing and dark, might have been understood as a womb of transformation. Could it be that the technical mastery visible in the Ajanta paintings reflects a body of artistic and scientific knowledge of optics, pigment chemistry, spatial geometry, and human psychology, that was developed to a level of sophistication in ancient India that we have radically underestimated? Some even wonder whether the placement of certain figures, the direction of their gazes, and the sequencing of scenes within the caves were designed to produce specific psychological effects in viewers moving through the space, that the caves were, in some sense, immersive installations engineered for transformative experience. How did the artists paint the ceiling frescoes, and what light sources did they use? Are there pigments or techniques in the murals that have not yet been chemically analyzed? What happened to the workshop tradition that produced this art? Was it destroyed, suppressed, or simply abandoned as Buddhism declined in India? And what would it have been like to live here, in these caves, surrounded on every side by the visual equivalent of a sacred library? Ajanta stands as a testament to the heights of human artistic achievement, heights so vertiginous, so unexpected, that they continue to confound every attempt to explain them in terms of available technology and historical circumstance. The paintings survive, barely and against all odds. Their makers are unknown. Their method is only partially understood. The story of Ajanta is the story of beauty that refuses to die, even when everything that made it possible has long since vanished. From the luminous darkness of the Ajanta caves, we travel now northwest, leaving the Indian subcontinent for the ancient heartland of Anatolia, where rock and memory have been carved into the same enduring substance. The landscape here is austerely beautiful, rolling plateaus of pale limestone, their surfaces scoured by winter winds into a texture that catches the late afternoon light at low, raking angles. Sparse scrub oak and wild thyme cling to the hillsides, and the sky, in the clear air of the Anatolian interior, has a depth and transparency that makes the stars, on cloudless nights, seem to press down, almost within reach. The rock outcrops that punctuate this plateau have an architectural quality: vertical faces, horizontal beds, the geometry of something that was designed rather than merely deposited. And into one such face, with a precision that speaks of profound technical skill and cosmological intention, a doorway to the dead has been carved. The Girdakaya rock tomb, or Geridakaya tomb, as it is also known, is one of a series of extraordinary Phrygian funerary monuments carved into the limestone cliffs of north-central Anatolia, in the region of modern Bolu province in Turkey. Dating to approximately the 6th or 7th century BCE, it belongs to the tradition of the ancient Phrygian civilization, a people whose cultural influence on the ancient world was far greater than their current historical visibility suggests. The tomb is carved directly into the living rock of the cliff face, its entrance framed by architectural elements executed in stone, with a level of precision and decorative sophistication that is, frankly, astonishing. The surface is covered in geometric and figural reliefs, the iconography dense and deliberate, every element in conversation with the others in a language we have not yet fully decoded. What baffles scholars of Phrygian culture is the extraordinary consistency of the rock tomb tradition, the degree to which, across dozens of sites scattered across the Anatolian plateau, the same architectural vocabulary appears, the same decorative motifs recur, and the same fundamental spatial conception is realized, suggesting not merely a shared aesthetic preference, but a precisely codified cosmological understanding of the transition between life and death. The most perplexing element is the apparent doorway carved at the center of many of these monuments, a door that leads nowhere, carved into the solid rock, its threshold never to be crossed by the living. What was the theological function of a door to nowhere, and who was it meant to receive? The Phrygians were an Indo-European people who migrated into Anatolia from the Balkans in the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse, establishing a kingdom that reached its greatest power under the legendary King Midas in the 8th century BCE. Their civilization was deeply original. They were celebrated in antiquity for their music. The Phrygian mode is one of the oldest named musical scales. Their metalwork and their distinctive religious sensibility centered on the worship of Cybele, the great mother goddess whose cult would eventually spread westward into Greece and Rome. The Phrygians occupied a cultural position between the Greek world to the west and the great Near Eastern civilizations to the east, absorbing and transforming influences from both. Some scholars propose that the false door carved into the rock tomb facade was understood as a literal threshold between worlds, a portal through which the soul of the deceased could pass, and through which divine power could, in certain ritual circumstances, enter the world of the living. The prevailing theory suggests that the rock tomb tradition was connected to the Sibyl cult, and that the carved monument functioned as a permanent shrine at which offerings and prayers could be directed to both the dead and to the goddess. Others suggest that the tomb could have been a symbolic representation of the mountain itself as a divine body, that carving into the rock was understood not as construction, but as revelation, as uncovering something that was already present within the stone. Perhaps this was a conduit between the human world and the underworld, a place where the membrane between the living and the dead was thin enough to communicate through. The false door was not a disappointment. It was the point. Could it be that the Phrygian tradition of rock-cut funerary architecture encoded a cosmological model of the afterlife so detailed and specific that the carvings themselves constituted a kind of map, a set of instructions for the soul's journey through the landscapes of the dead? Some even wonder whether the geometric precision of the tomb's carved architectural elements reflects mathematical knowledge, perhaps transmitted from the older Anatolian civilizations, the Hittites, the Eurasians, that the Phrygians absorbed and reinterpreted. Who lies within the solid rock behind this carved doorway? What rituals were performed at this threshold? And in what language were the prayers spoken? Is there a systematic cosmological logic to the placement of Phrygian rock tombs across the Anatolian plateau? A sacred geography that maps the landscape of the dead onto the landscape of the living? And what did it mean, in Phrygian theology, to carve a door that no one could open? The Girdakaya tomb stands as a testament to the profundity of ancient engagement with death. The extraordinary investment of skill, labor, and theological imagination that ancient peoples directed toward the one certainty they shared with us. They built doors to nowhere. They spent lifetimes perfecting the threshold. The story of this rock-cut monument is the story of our oldest, most persistent, and most unanswerable question. Very close to where we stand, and yet separated by a distance of centuries and cultural worlds, another carved monument of a very different kind once spoke to those who passed through this same ancient landscape. The road here has been a road for 2,000 years. It connects places that the Roman Empire connected, cities whose names changed over centuries while their positions remained fixed by geography. And at its edges, the accumulated evidence of all that passage lies just beneath the surface of the earth, waiting to be turned by a plow or revealed by erosion. The limestone country rolls gently here, less dramatic than the volcanic plateau to the west, more domesticated, more Mediterranean in its light, the light that falls on olive trees and red tile roofs and the ruins of aqueducts with the same equable warmth it has always brought to this coast. The obelisk of Gaius Cassius Faliscus is a Roman-era funerary monument located in the region of ancient Lydia in western Anatolia, present-day Turkey, and it is unusual in the landscape of Roman provincial commemorative art for several reasons. Its form, an obelisk rather than the more typical sarcophagus, altar, or tumulus, represents an Egyptian influence that, while not unheard of in the Roman world, is rare enough in this specific geographic and social context to demand explanation. Its inscription in Greek records the name and identity of its owner, Gaius Cassius Philiscus, a name that is itself a cultural palimpsest, a Latin prenomen and nomen, a Greek cognomen, embedded in a Greek inscription on an Egyptian form monument, in a region that was once Lydian, then Persian, then Greek, then Roman. Every element of this object speaks of layered identity. What baffles epigraphers and cultural historians is what the obelisk's peculiar hybridity tells us about the social and cultural life of provincial Roman Anatolia. The degree to which individuals navigated multiple ethnic and cultural identities simultaneously, and the choices they made in commemorating themselves for posterity. The most perplexing discovery is the tension between the monument's form and its context. Obelisks were, in the Roman world, symbols of pharaonic grandeur. The emperors had transported enormous obelisks from Egypt to Rome as trophies of conquest and markers of divine power. Why would a provincial individual of presumably modest means, the inscription gives no indication of exceptional status, choose an Egyptian funerary form for his monument? What was he claiming, and for whom? Roman provincial society in Anatolia was one of the most culturally complex environments the ancient world produced. The region had been consecutively part of the Lydian kingdom, the Persian Empire, the kingdoms of the Hellenistic successor states, the Attalid kingdom of Pergamon, and finally, the Roman province of Asia. Each transition leaving cultural residues that the next layer absorbed rather than erased. By the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, when Gaius Cassius Philiscus likely lived, the cities of Western Anatolia were cosmopolitan centers of Greek culture operating within a Roman political framework, with significant populations of Roman citizens, Greek-speaking locals, Jewish communities, and people of diverse other origins. Some scholars propose that the choice of an obelisk form may reflect the owner's connection to Egypt, whether through trade, family origin, or religious affiliation, and that the monument was intended to signal a specific identity within the cosmopolitan fabric of provincial society. The prevailing theory suggests that the Egyptianizing elements in Roman provincial art were associated, particularly in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, with the cult of Isis, one of the most widely distributed mystery religions in the Roman world. Others suggest that the obelisk could have been a symbolic representation of individual aspiration to a form of immortality specifically associated with Egyptian theology. The obelisk being, in its original context, a petrified ray of sunlight, a means of maintaining the dead's connection to the solar cycle of death and renewal. Perhaps this was a conduit to a very specific afterlife theology that its owner had adopted from Egyptian religious tradition, and that the monument was not merely commemorative, but functionally transformative, designed to facilitate the soul's solar journey. Could it be that the social world of Roman Anatolia was so genuinely plural, so accustomed to the mixing of religious traditions, ethnic identities, and cultural vocabularies, that a choice like this one required no special explanation at all, and that it is only our modern tendency to seek coherent cultural identities that makes the obelisk seem anomalous? Some even wonder whether the surviving epigraphic record of provincial Roman Anatolia dramatically underrepresents the diversity of commemorative choices, and that Gaius Cassius Philiscus was far from alone in his Egyptianizing impulse. Who was Gaius Cassius Philiscus? And what story did he want his monument to tell? Did he worship Isis? Was he born in Egypt? Did he travel there? Or did he simply find in the obelisk a form that spoke to something in him that no local tradition adequately expressed? And what does the existence of this modest, hybrid monument tell us about the texture of ordinary life in the Roman provincial world? The obelisk of Gaius Cassius Faliscus stands as a testament to the unresolvable complexity of identity in the ancient world, the way individuals have always lived in the cracks between categories, claiming multiple inheritances and leaving behind evidence that resists easy classification. He was Roman and Greek and perhaps Egyptian. He lived in Anatolia. He is buried in the question of who he was. The story of his obelisk is the story of a person who refused to be only one thing. From this quietly hybrid corner of Roman Anatolia, we journey now northeast, over the mountains of eastern Turkey and across the border into the Caucasus, to a Georgian village that clings to a cliff at the edge of a gorge as if it grew there, organic and defiant, at the frontier of the known world. The gorge cuts deep, 300–400 meters of sheer rock, dropping to a river that you can hear but not see, a rushing sound that rises from the darkness below with an intimacy that seems impossible given the distance. The walls of the gorge are a dizzying array of grey and ochre limestone, and the village, if that is the right word, clings to a ledge partway down the southern wall with an audacity that takes the breath away. Stone towers rise from stone houses, the same material as the cliff beneath them, so perfectly color-matched that the whole settlement seems less constructed than extruded from the rock itself. The wind up here is constant and cold. The sky is the color of iron. Mutso is a medieval ghost village, perched on the walls of the Mutso Gorge in the mountainous Kevsureti region of northeastern Georgia, in the Greater Caucasus Range, at an elevation of roughly 2,000 meters above sea level. Inhabited from at least the 10th century CE, and possibly much earlier, Mutso was one of the stronghold communities of the Kevsurs, a mountainous Georgian people of remarkable cultural distinctiveness, known for their warrior traditions, their sophisticated system of clan honor codes, and their deeply syncretic religion, which blended Orthodox Christianity with pre-Christian survivals of such antiquity that scholars are still debating their origin. The village is now abandoned, its last permanent inhabitants having left in the Soviet era, but its stone towers, defensive walls, and crypts remain largely intact, frozen in time at a moment of desertion that has paradoxically preserved it better than continuous habitation might have. What baffles anthropologists who have studied the Kevsurs is the extraordinary conservatism of their culture, the degree to which practices, beliefs, and social structures that disappeared elsewhere in the Caucasus centuries ago survived in these high mountain villages into the 20th century, documented by ethnographers with a mixture of astonishment and urgency. The most perplexing discovery is the nature of Kevsur religion, which the ethnographers found to be neither straightforwardly Christian nor straightforwardly pagan, but a unique synthesis in which Christian saints and pre-Christian deities occupied the same sacred geography, received offerings through the same priestly intermediaries, and were invoked in the same breath during the same ceremonies. Was this genuine theological synthesis, survival of an older tradition under a Christian veneer, or something entirely distinct that neither category adequately describes? The Kevsurs have long been the subject of romantic speculation, most famously in a theory popular in the early 20th century and long since dismissed by mainstream scholars, that they were descendants of crusaders who had wandered into the Caucasus and been absorbed by the local population, a theory inspired by the crosses on their traditional costumes, their distinctive chainmail armor, and their knightly code of honor. While this origin myth has been debunked, It points to something real. The caves do seem to have preserved cultural elements of extraordinary antiquity, and their martial and religious traditions have no close parallel anywhere in the Caucasus. Some scholars propose that the high mountain environment of Cave Suriti created the conditions for extreme cultural conservatism. That geographic isolation, combined with a harsh climate that made outside contact difficult, allowed cultural forms that had been superseded elsewhere to persist in these valleys long past their normal lifespan. The prevailing theory suggests that the syncretism of Kevser religion reflects the general pattern of Christianization in the Caucasus, in which the Orthodox Church, operating in remote areas with minimal clerical presence, accepted a degree of accommodation with pre-existing beliefs that would never have been tolerated in the urban centers. Others suggest that the Kevsur religious system could have been a symbolic representation of a theological worldview that predates the arrival of any of the world's major religions, a survival of Caucasian Bronze Age spirituality, adapted and reinterpreted through successive layers of cultural contact. Perhaps this was a conduit to a tradition of sacred knowledge that, because of its mountain refuge, was never fully suppressed by any of the empires or religions that passed through the Caucasus. Could it be that villages like Mutso functioned not merely as defensive settlements, but as repositories of a cultural and religious heritage that the communities understood themselves to be preserving? That their very inaccessibility was strategic, a means of protecting a way of life that they knew to be endangered. Some even wonder whether the elaborate system of family crypts at Mutso, in which generations of dead were kept above ground in stone houses of the dead, reflects a mortuary theology of great antiquity, a belief about the continued presence of ancestors in the life of the living community that Christianity modified but never entirely replaced. Who were the last people to leave Mutso, and what did they take with them? What prayers were spoken in this village's shrines? In what language? To what entities? Does the Kevsur religious synthesis preserve traces of a pre-Georgian, perhaps even pre-Caucasian belief system that has vanished everywhere else? Mutso stands as a testament to the remarkable tenacity of human communities in the face of geography, history, and isolation. The extraordinary resourcefulness of people who chose, for reasons we can only partly reconstruct, to build their lives on the walls of a gorge at the edge of the known world. The village is empty now, but the towers still watch. The story of Mutso is the story of a people who kept something safe for longer than seemed possible, and then quietly let it go. From the high Caucasian gorge of Georgia, we travel now westward across the Black Sea and into the heart of Europe, to a German castle ruin on a forested crag, a place where medieval power and natural drama have been fused into something that is equal parts fortress and mythology. The forest rises steeply from the valley floor, beech and oak, their trunks gray and straight, their canopy dense enough in summer to reduce the light to a shifting green twilight. The rock beneath them is red sandstone, fractured and tilted by tectonic pressures long since resolved, and where it breaks the surface, it does so with dramatic abruptness, sheer faces, jumbled boulders, overhangs that shelter colonies of ferns in their permanent shadow. The castle, when it appears above the trees, is almost an extension of the geology. Red walls rising from red rock, crenellations catching the last of the afternoon sun. The whole composition of such natural theatricality that it seems less built than dreamed. Grafenstein Castle, Burg Grafenstein, stands on a rocky outcrop in the Palatinate forest of Rhineland-Palatinate in southwestern Germany, its ruins dating primarily to the 14th century CE, though the site's occupation almost certainly predates the surviving structures. The castle belongs to the tradition of the German Felsenburgen, the rock castles, a distinctive Rhineland building type in which the natural topography of sandstone outcrops was exploited with extraordinary ingenuity. The architect integrating the castle's walls and towers so seamlessly with the living rock that the boundary between natural and artificial is frequently impossible to locate. Grafenstein is one of the finest examples of this tradition, a place where medieval military architecture and the Palatinate landscape have grown together into something that feels, despite its ruinous condition, entirely complete. What baffles historians of medieval fortification is the degree to which the Felsenburgen tradition reflects a building philosophy fundamentally different from the mainstream of European castle construction, one in which the site was not merely selected for strategic advantage, but was treated as an active participant in the design, the rock not as foundation, but as co-author. The most perplexing discovery at Grafenstein and comparable sites is the evidence of construction techniques that appear almost improvisational by contemporary standards. Walls that turn at unexpected angles to follow a rock face, towers founded directly on bare outcrops without conventional footings, staircases carved into the stone itself. Was this improvisation, or a deeply sophisticated understanding of how natural geology could substitute for artificial construction? The Palatinate forest in the high medieval period was contested territory, a landscape of competing jurisdictions, episcopal and secular, in which the ability to claim, defend, and administer territory from a fortified height was a political necessity. The counts and knights who built and held the Felsenburgen were operators in a complex feudal system, their castles both military assets and symbols of legitimate authority, their rock-cut fortresses advertising their mastery over a landscape that was simultaneously deeply wild. The forest itself was a contested resource, its game, its timber, its charcoal-burning rights, and the castle above it was a physical claim on all of it. Some scholars propose that the integration of natural rock into castle construction was purely pragmatic, that it reduced the quantity of cut stone required, exploited the natural defensive advantages of elevated rock outcrops, and made the castle harder to undermine. The prevailing theory suggests that the Palatinate Felsenburgen represent a regional architectural tradition shaped by the specific geology of the red sandstone ridge, which offered abundant outcrops of structural quality, combined with a softness that allowed the rock to be shaped, carved, and integrated into masonry construction with relative ease. Others suggest that the building philosophy of the Felsenburgen reflects a deeper medieval understanding of the relationship between human construction and natural order, that the castle was seen not as an imposition on the landscape, but as a completion of it, the human intelligence that recognized and fulfilled the defensive potential inherent in the rock's natural formation. Perhaps this was a conduit between the social world of the medieval nobility and the natural world of the forest, a built environment that was also a negotiation with the non-human. Could it be that the choice of dramatic rock outcrops for castle sites was motivated not only by military and practical considerations, but by an aesthetic and symbolic sensibility? That the visual drama of a castle on a crag communicated power and authority in a language that was read not just strategically, but emotionally. Some even wonder whether the Palatinate rock castles were understood as genuinely sacred spaces, places where the vertical axis of the crag, rising above the horizontal forest, aligned with cosmological ideas about the relationship between earthly and divine authority. Who chose this specific rock, and what did they see in it? Are there remains beneath the current structure that would reveal an earlier occupation of the outcrop? Is the integration of natural and artificial at Grafenstein the product of careful planning, accumulated tradition, or both? And what would it have been like to live here, perched on this red rock above the forest, in a world where the boundary between the human and the wild was far thinner than it is today? Grafenstein Castle stands as a testament to the imagination that turns geography into destiny, the extraordinary human capacity to look at a rock and see, within its natural form, the shape of something that needs to be completed. The castle was not imposed on this outcrop. It was revealed. The story of Grafenstein is the story of the forest and the stone and the ambition of the people who understood that they were already one. From the forests of the German Palatinate, we journey now to the opposite end of the Eurasian continent, to the deserts of northwestern China, where an imperial dynasty erected its tombs in a silence so vast and so complete that the mystery of their presence is amplified by the magnitude of their emptiness. The desert here is not the soft, rolling desert of popular imagination. It is flat and grey and stony, broken by low ridges of wind-carved rock and interrupted at intervals by the pale, conical forms of eroded earthen mounds that rise from the plain with the mute authority of pyramids, which, in a sense, is precisely what they are. The Helen Mountains stand to the west, a dark wall against the pale sky, and between their flank and the Yellow River to the east, the ancient empire of Xixia stretched in all directions across a landscape that seems designed to erase anything too small or too human to resist. The mounds are not too small. They have survived. The Xixia imperial tombs, known in Chinese as the Exbuxia Wangling, are a series of royal burial mounds located near Yinchuan in the Ningxia Hui autonomous region of northwestern China, dating to the Xixia dynasty, which ruled this region from approximately 1038 to 1227 CE. The Xixia, or Western Xia, was a state founded by the Tangut people, a Tibeto-Burman ethnic group who built a sophisticated civilization at the intersection of the Chinese, Tibetan, and Mongolian cultural worlds, developing their own unique writing system, their own distinctive artistic tradition, and their own form of Tibetan Buddhism. The dynasty ended with catastrophic abruptness when Genghis Khan, after a decade of warfare against them, destroyed their capital and reportedly ordered the massacre of the entire Tangut royal family and the deliberate erasure of their civilization from history. He largely succeeded. The Tanguts and their language are almost entirely gone. What baffles historians of the Tangut civilization is the degree to which the Xixia's material culture, its art, its architecture, its literary and religious production, reflects a synthesis of extraordinary creativity and sophistication that simply should not exist in a polity of this size and duration, according to conventional historical models. The most perplexing discovery is the Tangut script itself, a writing system of more than 6,000 characters created in the 11th century by a scholar named Yeli Renrong on the orders of the dynasty's founder, Li Yuanhao. The script is morphologically distinct from Chinese, complex to a degree that suggests centuries of prior linguistic tradition rather than deliberate invention, and was used to translate a vast body of Chinese and Tibetan literature into Tangut. Who truly invented this script? And why was it designed to be so deliberately and elaborately different from the Chinese writing system it partly resembles? The Tanguts occupied one of the most culturally crossroads adjacent positions of any medieval people. Bordered by the Song Chinese to the east, the Tibetan kingdoms to the south, the Mongolian steppe to the north, and the Silk Road to the west. Their state was wealthy from the tribute they extracted from Silk Road traffic, and their court was a place of genuine intellectual ambition. They collected libraries, patronized Buddhist scholarship, and commissioned art that absorbed and transformed influences from all their neighbors while remaining distinctively Tangut. Their tombs, built in imitation of the great Chinese imperial mausolea of the Tang and Song dynasties, but adapted to Tangut cosmological preferences, are the most visible surviving testimony to a civilization that its destroyers tried to make as if it had never been. Some scholars propose that the Xixia tombs were built according to Feng Shui principles aligned with the Helan Mountains to the west, that the position of each mound was determined by a careful reading of the landscape's qi, with the mountains serving as the protective dragon ridge behind which the imperial dead could rest in maximal geomantic harmony. The prevailing theory suggests that the conical earthen mounds, so different from the flat-topped tumuli of Chinese royal tombs, reflect a specifically Tangut or Tibeto-Burman mortuary tradition that was maintained even as the dynasty adopted many other Chinese cultural forms. Others suggest that the tombs could have been a symbolic representation of the sacred mountains of Tibetan Buddhist cosmology, that each mound was understood as a miniature Mount Meru, the axis of the universe, and that the imperial dead were conceived as residing not merely in the earth, but at the center of the cosmos. Perhaps this was a conduit between the human world and the pure lands of Tibetan Buddhist geography, the tomb functioning as a permanent portal through which prayers and offerings could flow in both directions. Could it be that the systematic destruction of Xixi's capital and records by the Mongols was itself a recognition of the Tangut civilization's unusual power? That Genghis Khan's order to erase them was motivated not merely by military logic, but by a more specific fear of what the Tanguts represented? Some even wonder whether the Tangut script encodes a body of knowledge, theological, astronomical, or historical, that has not yet been fully recovered from the surviving manuscripts scattered across libraries in St. Petersburg, Beijing, and London. What is buried beneath the conical mounds of the Xixia tombs, and has any of it survived the centuries of uncontrolled looting that followed the dynasty's destruction? What does the Tangut script, in its extraordinary complexity, tell us about the nature of the civilization that created it? Is there a cosmological logic to the arrangement of the imperial mounds that has not yet been decoded? And what became of those Tanguts who survived the Mongol destruction? Where did they go, and do their descendants still exist? The Xixia imperial tombs stand as a testament to the fragility of civilizations and the extraordinary stubbornness of the material record. The fact that even a dynasty whose destroyers tried to remove it from history entirely can leave behind 9 emperors' mounds on a desert plain that no one, not even Genghis Khan, could erase. The Tanguts are gone. Their tombs remain. The story of Xixia is the story of a civilization that refused, in stone and script and the geometry of its royal dead, to be completely forgotten. Leaving the desert silence of northwestern China, we travel now northwestward across Eurasia and then south across the Atlantic, arriving eventually at the foggy cliffs of the British Isles, where a very different kind of royal legend has attached itself to the ruins of a very real place. The cliff edge drops away to nothing, a sheer fall of more than 100 meters to where the Atlantic crashes and foams in perpetual contest with the grey Cornish rock. The sea here is neither blue nor green, but something darker, more complex, shot through with the grey-green of deep water and the white of permanent turbulence. The wind is constant, salt-edged and cold even in summer, and the headland on which you stand is connected to the mainland by a narrow bridge of rock so attenuated that every winter storm seems to threaten its final severance. On this headland, and on the promontory above the sea to its south, the ruins of a medieval castle look out over the emptiness of the North Atlantic with an expression that is equal parts defiance and melancholy. Tintagel Castle, located on the North Cornish coast of England near the village of Tintagel, is among the most famous and most archaeologically complex castle ruins in Britain. The surviving medieval structure dates primarily to the 13th century CE, built by Richard, Earl of Cornwall, brother of Henry III, who chose this dramatic site almost certainly because of its association with an already ancient tradition connecting the headland to King Arthur, the legendary British king whose historical existence, if it existed at all, would place him in the 5th or 6th century CE. What archaeology has revealed, however, is that the site's occupation long predates both the medieval castle and any possible Arthurian period. The headland shows evidence of intensive occupation from the Roman period, and most significantly, a flourishing late antique trading settlement of the 5th and 6th centuries CE, precisely the period in which any historical Arthur would have lived. What baffles archaeologists is the scale and sophistication of the late antique occupation at Tintagel. Excavations since the 1930s, with major advances in recent decades, have revealed evidence of high-status occupation, including enormous quantities of imported Mediterranean pottery, amphoras from what is now Turkey and North Africa, fine tableware from the Eastern Mediterranean, that indicate the site was, in the 5th and 6th centuries, a place of significant wealth engaged in trade networks extending across the entire Mediterranean world. Most perplexing is the discovery in 2016 of a stone bearing an inscription in late Roman script that includes the name Artognu, a name etymologically related to Arthur, raising questions that the archaeological establishment has handled with extreme caution. Is this a coincidence, a confirmation, or simply evidence of the extraordinary density of Arthurian projection onto this site? The period of Tintagel's late antique florescence, the 5th and 6th centuries CE, was one of the most turbulent in British history. The Roman legions had withdrawn from Britain in 410 CE, leaving behind a patchwork of sub-Roman kingdoms struggling to maintain order in the face of Anglo-Saxon migration from the east. Cornwall, geographically peripheral to the Anglo-Saxon advance, remained a stronghold of Celtic Brythonic culture longer than most of Britain, and the trade connections evidenced at Tintagel suggest that its rulers maintained contact with the wider Mediterranean world even as the former Roman province to the east fragmented. Some scholars propose that Tintagel in the late antique period was the seat of a regional king, perhaps a Cornish or West British ruler of considerable importance, whose imported luxury goods and Mediterranean trade connections marked him as a figure of pan-British significance. The prevailing theory suggests that the Arthurian legend, originating in the oral traditions of Celtic Wales and Cornwall, attached itself to Tintagel through a process of mythological geography, projecting the legendary king onto the most dramatically suitable landscape available. Others suggest that the headland's sacred significance may predate even the late antique occupation, that the extreme topography of Tintagel, the narrow neck of land connecting the promontory to the mainland, its position at the very edge of the known world, gave it a liminal quality that attracted both actual high-status occupation and legendary attachment. Perhaps this was a conduit between the human world and the oceanic beyond, a place where, in Celtic cosmology, the boundary between this world and the other world was thin, and where consequently both power and myth gathered. Could it be that the legend of Arthur's birth at Tintagel, as recorded by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century, preserves a genuine folk memory of a significant late antique figure whose actual identity has been dissolved into myth over the intervening centuries? Some even wonder whether the extraordinary investment of the Earls of Cornwall in this site, Richard of Cornwall's 13th century castle, built on a headland that offered almost no practical military advantage, reflects their belief that Arthurian association conferred a legitimacy that mere military strength could not. Who was the actual ruler of Tintagel in the 5th and 6th centuries, and what did they understand their authority to rest on? Is the Artanu inscription genuinely connected to the Arthurian tradition, or is this projection? What became of the Mediterranean trade network that supplied the site's luxury pottery, and why did it apparently end so abruptly? And what does it mean that the most powerful legend in British history attached itself to a real place, making the myth and the archaeology inseparable? Tintagel stands as a testament to the extraordinary power of narrative to shape our understanding of material reality, the way legend can become so thoroughly entangled with a place that separating the mythological from the archaeological becomes a task that defeats even the most rigorous scientific method. The castle ruins are real. The legend is real in a different sense. The story of Tintagel is still being written by everyone who stands on that cliff and looks out at the Atlantic and wonders. From the Atlantic-battered cliffs of Cornwall, we travel across the ocean to a very different cliff, a jungle-clad limestone escarpment in southern Mexico, where the ruins of a Maya city carry a religious significance that was, for centuries, one of the deepest secrets of the ancient Americas. The jungle here is not merely vegetation. It is an atmosphere, warm and saturated, pressing against every surface, filling every silence with the sound of insects and birds, its green light filtering down through layers of canopy that seem to stratify the air itself into distinct zones of brightness and shadow. The limestone ridge rises from the forest floor at an angle, and on its summit, visible through the trees before you reach them, the temples emerge in stages. First a roofline, then a wall, then the full architectural presence of structures that were built not to blend into the landscape, but to command it. Here, at Palenque, the Maya built temples to carry messages that were never meant to be decoded by outsiders. The Temple of the Cross complex is one of the most remarkable architectural and theological ensembles in the ancient Americas. Located within the great Maya city of Palenque in the present-day Mexican state of Chiapas, and dating to approximately 692 CE, built during the reign of the great king Kinichkanbahlam II, son of the more famous Pakal the Great. The complex consists of 3 temples: the Temple of the Cross, the Temple of the Foliated Cross, and the Temple of the Sun, arranged around a plaza on a ridge above Palenque's central city, each containing a sanctuary at its rear whose walls bear some of the most extraordinary carved, hieroglyphic, and figural reliefs in the Maya world. The texts inscribed within these temples were, for more than a century after their discovery, undeciphered, and when they were finally decoded in the latter 20th century, What they revealed about Maya cosmology astonished the scholarly world. What baffles epigraphers and art historians even now is the degree to which the theological program of the cross complex exceeds, in complexity, in specificity, in the precision of its cosmological argument, almost any other surviving ancient religious text. The most perplexing discovery is the nature of the central image in the temple of the cross itself. A great branching tree, its roots descending into the underworld, and its crown reaching toward the sky, flanked by two figures engaged in a ritual of cosmic transmission, the inheritance of divine kingship across the generations. This is not merely political propaganda. It is a complete cosmological charter, executed in carved stone with the confidence of people who understood the universe with a thoroughness that challenges every assumption we make about the intellectual capabilities of pre-literate civilizations. What did the builders of these temples know, and how did they know it? The Maya of Palenque, in the late Classic period, roughly the 7th and 8th centuries CE, were among the most intellectually sophisticated people of the ancient world. Their mathematical system, which included the concept of zero independently of the Old World, allowed them to perform astronomical calculations of extraordinary accuracy, tracking the cycles of Venus, the solar year, the lunar calendar, and the long count calendar with a precision that modern astronomers continue to verify against computer-generated models. Their writing system was fully logographic syllabic, capable of recording any statement in their language, and their theological texts were works of genuine philosophical complexity, dealing with questions of cosmic origin, the nature of the divine, the relationship between the living and the dead, and the obligations of kingship within the sacred order. Some scholars propose that the Temple of the Cross complex was built as Kinich Khan Bahalam II's theological justification for his rule, that the complex's cosmological argument, which traces the genealogy of divine kingship back to the first act of creation, served the specific political purpose of legitimizing his succession to a throne he had waited too long to inherit. The prevailing theory suggests that the three temples correspond to three aspects of the Maya cosmos: sky, earth, and underworld, and that together they constituted a complete model of the universe centered on Palenque and its ruling dynasty. Others suggest that the cross complex could have been a symbolic representation of the Waka Chan Ti, the world tree of Maya cosmology, made physically real in architectural form, with the temples themselves functioning as the cosmic axis around which all spatial and temporal order was organized. Perhaps this was a conduit for the specific rituals of bloodletting, incense offering, and astronomical observation through which the Maya king maintained the cosmic order and prevented the universe from collapsing into chaos. Could it be that the astronomical alignments of the cross complex, which appear to track specific celestial events with a precision that could only have been achieved through generations of careful observation, encode a calendar of rituals designed to synchronize human action with cosmic cycles in ways that modern scholarship has only partially recovered? Some even wonder whether the hieroglyphic texts within the temples contain information about astronomical phenomena, eclipses, planetary conjunctions, solstitial alignments, that has not yet been fully correlated with the physical architecture. What rituals occurred in the sanctuaries of these temples, and on what specific dates? What did Kinich Khan Bahalam II see when he entered the Temple of the Cross on the day of its dedication? What visual and acoustic experience did the architecture provide? Are there carvings or inscriptions within the temples that have not yet been fully interpreted, whose meaning might alter the current scholarly consensus? And what happened to Palenque? Why was this city of extraordinary intellectual achievement abandoned, its temples left to the jungle? The Temple of the Cross complex stands as a testament to the depth and sophistication of ancient intellectual achievement in the Americas, a monument that required not just architectural skill, but a mastery of theology, cosmology, mathematics, and political philosophy that we are still in the process of fully appreciating. The trees have grown back around it. The jungle has learned to live with it. The story of Palenque's cross complex is still being deciphered, sentence by sentence, from the stone. Crossing now from the New World back to the Old, we travel northeast, across the Atlantic, and through the Caucasus into the high plateau of Armenia, where the ruins of a monastery hold within their walls a history of faith, destruction, and survival that is among the most moving in all of Christianity's long and complicated story. The plateau opens suddenly after the narrow mountain pass, a wide, high grassland bowl ringed by volcanic peaks, their flanks darkened by ancient lava flows, their summits catching the cloud. The light here is the light of altitude, intense, directionless, making shadows short and sharp. In a fold of the hills, where a small stream has cut a shallow ravine, the stones of a ruined monastery emerge from the grass, basalt walls still standing to a height of several meters in places, the characteristic Armenian cross stone, the khachkar, still upright among the fallen architraves, the whole complex bearing the specific quality of ruin that speaks of violence rather than neglect, of deliberate destruction rather than the slow work of time. Archaeological is a ruined medieval Armenian monastery located in the Geghakunik region of present-day Armenia, its surviving structures dating primarily to the 12th and 13th centuries CE, though the site's monastic occupation is believed to extend considerably further back, possibly to the early Christian period, when Armenia became the first nation in the world to adopt Christianity as its state religion in 301 CE. The monastery's name means the Monastery of the Spring in Armenian, a reference to the water source that made permanent habitation of this high location possible. What survives today is a complex of roofless but still structurally significant church buildings, auxiliary structures, and the distinctive carved khachkars that are among the most characteristic and enigmatic products of Armenian medieval art. Stone crosses whose surrounding fields of interlaced ornament are executed with a technical virtuosity and an aesthetic complexity that has never been fully explained. What baffles art historians and theologians who study Armenian medieval art is the extraordinary sophistication of the khachkar tradition. The way these carved crossstones, produced in vast numbers across Armenia from the 9th century onward, managed to combine Christian theological symbolism with decorative programs of such mathematical and optical complexity that they appear to anticipate artistic developments that would not occur in the Western European tradition for centuries. The most perplexing discovery is the structural logic of the interlaced patterns. When subjected to geometric analysis, they reveal underlying grids of extraordinary precision, suggesting that the carvers were working from mathematical models, possibly transmitted from Islamic geometric art, possibly developed independently, that gave their seemingly spontaneous ornament a rigorous underlying structure. Who developed this system? Was it transmitted from master to apprentice, or derived anew by each generation? The Armenian Apostolic Church, whose theological tradition traces its origins to the apostles Thaddeus and Bartholomew, developed in a position of extraordinary cultural and political pressure, surrounded by Byzantine Christianity to the west, Zoroastrian and later Islamic Persia to the east, and successive waves of conquest from the Parthians, Sassanids, Arabs, Seljuks, Mongols, and Ottomans in between. The Armenians' ability to maintain a distinct Christian identity under these pressures, to preserve their language, their liturgy, their art, and their theological distinctiveness through centuries of occupation and attempted assimilation, is one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of any faith community. Some scholars propose that the Khachkar tradition at Archaeological and similar sites reflects a specifically Armenian theological understanding of the cross as the intersection of the horizontal and vertical axes of the cosmos, earth and heaven, time and eternity, and that the interlace ornament surrounding it represents the infinite complexity of divine creation made visible in mathematical form. The prevailing theory suggests that the tradition developed from a synthesis of early Christian symbolism with pre-Christian Armenian decorative arts, mediated through the influence of Byzantine and Islamic artistic traditions in the medieval period. Others suggest that the Khachkar could have been a symbolic representation of the theological concept of divine light, the interlace patterns producing, through their optical complexity, an effect of luminosity that was understood not as aesthetic, but as genuinely theophanic. Perhaps this was a conduit through which the divine presence was made perceptible in material form, the stone itself becoming, through the carver's work, a vehicle for sacred experience. Could it be that the mathematical complexity of the Khachkar ornament reflects a body of knowledge, geometrical, optical, perhaps cosmological, that was transmitted through the Armenian monastic tradition from sources that have not yet been identified? Some even wonder whether the specific interlace patterns used at different sites encode theological statements that have not yet been decoded, that the ornament is not merely decorative, but semantic. What prayers were spoken in the now roofless churches of Archaeological? Who carved the Khachkars that still stand among the ruins, and what did the act of carving mean to them? Is there a complete mathematical system underlying the Khachkar ornament that, if fully reconstructed, would reveal the extent of medieval Armenian mathematical knowledge? And why, of all the things the Armenians chose to preserve through the centuries of occupation and persecution, did the Khachkar survive as perhaps the single most characteristic expression of their identity? Archaeological stands as a testament to the extraordinary power of cultural identity, the way a community under existential pressure can invest its deepest convictions into an art form so refined, so technically demanding, so spiritually charged that it becomes nearly indestructible. The monastery is ruined. The Khachkars still stand. The story of Armenian Christianity is not over. It never was. From the Armenian highlands, we travel now northwest, across the Atlantic to the American Southwest, where the ruins of a civilization that mastered the desert have raised questions that a century of archaeology has not resolved. The canyon is silent in a way that cities never are, a silence that has texture and weight, compounded by the scale of the surrounding landscape, the billion-year-old geology of the canyon walls, and the absence of anything that moves except the light. The Redenoka sandstone cliffs rise 200 meters above the canyon floor, and against their south-facing walls, the ruins of great houses, massive multi-storied structures of precisely laid masonry, are embedded like crystals in rock, their alignment too deliberate, their geometry too purposeful to be explained by any purely practical logic. As you stand in the canyon and watch the morning shadow line move across the ruins, you understand, viscerally and immediately, that whoever built this place was watching the same thing you are watching. They built their walls to track that line. Chaco Canyon, located in the high desert of northwestern New Mexico in the United States, was the center of what archaeologists call the Chacoan or ancestral Puebloan culture from approximately 850 to 1150 CE, a period in which this remote and apparently inhospitable canyon became the ceremonial, administrative, and architectural center of a regional system that extended across more than 100,000 square kilometers of the Colorado Plateau. The great houses of Chaco, Pueblo Bonito, Chetroquetl, Pueblo del Arroyo, and the others are among the largest pre-Columbian structures in North America, their construction requiring the importation of more than 200,000 tons of sandstone and an estimated 200,000 wooden roof beams from forests that lay between 60 and 80 kilometers away. By any measure, Chaco was a project of extraordinary ambition and organizational complexity for a society with no draft animals and no wheeled vehicles. What baffles archaeologists about Chaco is not the scale of the construction, remarkable as that is, but the precision of its astronomical alignments, which appear to go far beyond anything required for practical purposes and suggest a level of cosmological knowledge that the Chacoan people have never been given credit for. The Great House of Pueblo Bonito is oriented along a precise north-south axis. The entire canyon site appears to be organized along an astronomical grid. Most perplexing are the alignments discovered at the so-called Sun Dagger site on Fajada Butte, a spiral petroglyph that is bisected by a dagger of light at the summer and winter solstices, and the spring and fall equinoxes with precision sufficient to function as a solar and lunar calendar. Who designed this system, and how was it used? The people who built Chaco were the ancestors of the present-day Pueblo peoples of the American Southwest: Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and the Rio Grande Pueblos, whose oral traditions maintain memories of Chaco that are simultaneously proud and troubled, acknowledging the greatness of what was built there while also describing the conditions that led to its abandonment. The ancestral Puebloans were dry land farmers of great ingenuity, managing water in a landscape of radical scarcity through a system of dams, check dams, and irrigation channels whose sophistication still impresses modern hydrologists. Their society at Chaco was hierarchical to a degree that remains debated. The presence of elite burials with extraordinary wealth in the great houses suggests a social complexity markedly different from the more egalitarian structure of later Pueblo societies. Some scholars propose that Chaco functioned primarily as a regional redistribution center, a place to which people came from across the Colorado Plateau to exchange goods, conduct ceremonies, and reinforce social relationships, and that the great houses were not permanent residences but ceremonial structures used only at specific times of the year by large gathering populations. The prevailing theory suggests that the canyon's road system, straight roads of unusual width that extend from Chaco in cardinal and intercardinal directions, ignoring topographic obstacles, was designed to facilitate this regional pilgrimage and exchange system. Others suggest that Chaco could have been a symbolic representation of the Pueblo cosmological model of the universe, a physical realization of the sacred geography that organized Pueblo thought, with the great houses representing specific cosmological locations and the roads connecting them representing the pathways between worlds. Perhaps this was a conduit between the human world and the realm of the Kachinas, the spirit intermediaries of Pueblo theology, and the astronomical alignments were not merely calendrical but liturgical, triggering specific ceremonies at cosmologically significant moments. Could it be that the Chaconne road system, which some researchers have suggested extends far beyond any practical functional requirement, was designed not to move people and goods, but to move power? That the roads were, in a religious sense, channels along which cosmic energy flowed between Chaco and the surrounding landscape. Some even wonder whether the extraordinary precision of Chacoan astronomical alignments reflects a body of knowledge transmitted from Mesoamerica through trading networks that connected the American Southwest to the great civilizations of Mexico. What was the daily experience of living at Chaco? The sound, the scale, the organization of space. What happened here at the solstices, and who performed the ceremonies? Why did the Chacones abandon their extraordinary construction projects so abruptly, leaving the great houses empty and the roads unused? And what do the Pueblo people's oral traditions, which scholars have barely begun to systematically consult, actually say about this place? Chaco Canyon stands as a testament to the invisible dimensions of ancient civilization. The knowledge, the belief, the social organization, the cosmological imagination that produced these walls and roads and alignments, but left no written record of its own motivations. The sandstone holds the shapes of human intention without revealing their content. The story of Chaco is the story of a silence that speaks louder than any text. From the desert silence of New Mexico, we cross the Atlantic and travel northwest to a very different kind of silence. The wet, grey, oceanic silence of the Irish coast, where the ruins of a tower house occupy a cliff edge above a sea that has been both the highway and the limit of an island civilization. The island is small and windswept, its surface a mosaic of grey limestone pavement and vivid green grass that grows in the cracks and hollows of the rock, and around its edges the cliffs drop sheer to the Atlantic, whose swells, even on calm days, thunder against the base of the island with a persistence that seems geological. The sky is the sky of the west of Ireland, vast, variable, changing from brilliant to overcast in the time it takes to cross a field. And the ruins of the castle stand on the highest point of the island, their grey limestone walls the same color as the rock beneath them. The whole composition of such severe austerity that it seems designed to resist everything: weather, time, and the gaze of anyone who approaches from the sea. O'Brien's castle stands on Innis Oyer, the smallest of the three Aran Islands off the Galway coast of Western Ireland, and it is among the oldest surviving tower house structures in Ireland, with elements of its construction dating to the 14th century CE, though the site on which it stands has been occupied since at least the Iron Age, with evidence of a prehistoric stone fort beneath and around the medieval structure. The castle takes its name from the O'Brien dynasty, the great Munster kings who controlled much of Western Ireland in the medieval period and who used the Aran Islands as a strategic outpost at the entrance to Galway Bay. As a military structure, it is modest. The tower house form is functional rather than monumental, but as a symbol of the relationship between Irish civilization and the Atlantic, it is extraordinarily resonant. What baffles historians of medieval Ireland is the degree to which the Aran Islands, despite their apparent remoteness and the harshness of their environment, functioned as a major center of early Christian monasticism, attracting scholars, saints, and pilgrims from across the British Isles and the continent during the 5th through 12th centuries, accumulating a density of early Christian remains that is extraordinary in relation to the island's small size. Innis Oyer alone contains the ruins of several early medieval churches and a holy well associated with Saint Cauman, the island's patron saint, whose feast draws pilgrims to the present day. The most perplexing discovery is the degree to which the island appears to have been understood as a sacred threshold, a place at the very western edge of the known Christian world, where the Atlantic beyond represented both the limit of the earthly and the beginning of the divine. The Aran Islands in the early medieval period occupied a position of considerable theological significance in Celtic Christianity. They were understood as islands on the way to the mythological Western paradise, the Tír na Nog, the land of eternal youth, that Celtic tradition located beyond the horizon of the Atlantic. For the earliest Christian monks, who overlaid their theology onto this pre-existing geography, the islands were a liminal space, a place close enough to the edge of the world to make the divine unusually accessible and remote enough to provide the solitude that contemplative life required. The great monastery of Kilronan on Innis Moor, the largest of the Aran Islands, was one of the most important centres of early Irish learning. Some scholars propose that the strategic positioning of O'Brien's castle on the island's highest point reflects the practical military logic of controlling the entrance to Galway Bay, that whoever held the Aran Islands could effectively tax and regulate the maritime trade entering one of medieval Ireland's most important commercial harbours. The prevailing theory suggests that the castle was built and maintained as part of a broader system of coastal fortification that the O'Briens maintained across their western maritime territories. Others suggest that the castle's position on a site with a much earlier history of sacred occupation is not coincidental, that the O'Briens, like many medieval Irish dynasties, deliberately built their fortifications on sites with pre-existing spiritual significance in order to absorb the sacred authority of the place. Perhaps this was a conduit between political power and the sacred geography of the Irish landscape, the castle occupying not merely a strategic height, but a spiritually charged threshold between the human world and the oceanic beyond. Could it be that the extraordinary density of religious activity on the Aran Islands reflects not merely the practical virtues of island monasticism, but a much older tradition of regarding these specific islands as sacred, a tradition that predates Christianity, predates even the recorded history of the Gaelic world, and reaches back to the Atlantic Bronze Age, when the islands of the far western coast occupied a special position in the cosmological imagination of the peoples of the Atlantic facade. What is buried beneath O'Brien's castle that has not yet been excavated? What did the early Christian monks who lived on this island see from the cliff edge when they looked out at the Atlantic? And what did they believe lay beyond it? Is the sacred geography of the Aran Islands, their specific configuration of holy wells, early churches, and prehistoric monuments, the product of deliberate planning, or the accumulated product of 3,000 years of religious response to an exceptional landscape? And what does it mean to build a castle at the edge of the world? O'Brien's castle stands as a testament to the extraordinary persistence of sacred geography, the way certain landscapes acquire and accumulate spiritual meaning across millennia, each generation of inhabitants finding in the same hills and cliffs and seaways the expression of their deepest convictions about the nature of reality. The Atlantic is unchanged. The castle is ruined. The island is still inhabited. The story of Innis Oia is still being lived. From the Atlantic edge of Ireland, we travel southeast, across the Celtic Sea and the English Channel and the breadth of Europe, to a corner of the Balkan Peninsula where the ruins of a medieval church hold within their walls a history of faith and catastrophe. The valley folds quietly into the Rila Mountains, the slopes rising steeply on both sides, clothed in mixed forest, beech and fir, their trunks grey and dark green in the damp air, and the stream at the valley's bottom runs clear over stones that have been polished by millennia of mountain water. The ruins of the church occupy a small clearing on a south-facing slope, their limestone walls golden in the afternoon sun, the empty arches of their windows framing views of the forest, and the distant peaks with a compositional perfection that seems too deliberate to be accidental. The silence here is the silence of mountains, deep and resonant. The ruins of St. Ivan Rilski Church are located in the vicinity of the Rila Monastery in the Rila Mountains of southwestern Bulgaria, the spiritual and cultural heartland of Bulgarian Orthodox Christianity, named for the 10th century hermit St. Ivan Rilski, who made his home in these mountains and whose memory the Bulgarian people have venerated continuously for more than 1,000 years. The ruined church complex, distinct from the main monastery that still stands and functions as an active monastic community, represents an earlier phase of religious settlement in this valley, a phase that was destroyed, rebuilt, and modified through the centuries of Ottoman occupation of the Balkans, during which Bulgarian Christian identity survived under conditions of periodic and sometimes intense persecution. The ruins bear the specific marks of that survival: rebuildings over destructions, additions that accommodate new needs, the archaeological stratigraphy of a faith that refused to die. What baffles historians of Bulgarian Christianity is the degree to which the cult of St. Ivan Rilski functioned not merely as a religious tradition, but as the primary vehicle of Bulgarian cultural and linguistic identity during the 5 centuries of Ottoman rule. The way the Rila Monastery and the sites associated with the saint throughout the Rila Mountains became a repository of Bulgarian manuscripts, a center of Bulgarian literacy, and a spatial anchor for a sense of national and ethnic identity at a time when the Bulgarian state had ceased to exist. The most perplexing discovery is the extraordinary mobility of the saint's relics through the medieval period, carried from Bulgaria to Serbia to Tarnovo and back, each translation of the relics representing a claim on the saint's power by the political authority that possessed them. What does it mean for a set of bones to become a political instrument of such significance? And what did the Bulgarian people believe they were preserving in the relics and the ruins of the Rila Valley that was worth such extraordinary effort? St. Ivan Rilski himself, the historical hermit who withdrew to these mountains in the early 10th century and whose cave-dwelling asceticism attracted disciples who eventually formed the nucleus of the Rila monastic community, is among the most clearly documented of the early Balkan saints. His life recorded in several medieval hagiographies that preserve genuinely historical information alongside the inevitable legendary accretions. He lived through the period of Bulgaria's greatest medieval power, the First Bulgarian Empire under Tsar Simeon the Great, and his retreat from the world represented in the theological vocabulary of his time a form of spiritual authority that complemented and sometimes challenged secular power. Some scholars propose that the Rila Monastery's extraordinary cultural role during the Ottoman period was enabled by the specific political arrangements of the Ottoman millet system, which allowed the administration of Christian communities through their own religious hierarchies and gave monastic institutions a degree of cultural autonomy that secular communities did not enjoy. The prevailing theory suggests that the monastery functioned effectively as a state in miniature for the Bulgarian Orthodox community, preserving and transmitting the Bulgarian literary tradition, training clergy, and maintaining an institutional memory of pre-Ottoman Bulgarian cultural achievement. Others suggest that the ruins of the St. Ivan Rilski church complex point to a deeper layer of sacred geography, that the hermit's original choice of the Rila Mountains as his retreat was not random, but reflected an existing understanding of the valley as a place of unusual spiritual power. Perhaps this was a conduit through which the specifically Bulgarian synthesis of Balkan spirituality, shaped by the competing influences of Byzantine Christianity, Bogomil heterodoxy, and pre-Christian Slavic and Thracian religious survivals, found its most enduring expression. Could it be that the specific ruins in the Rila Valley preserve traces of a religious landscape far more complex than the standard narrative of Bulgarian orthodoxy acknowledges? Evidence of heterodox communities, alternative liturgical traditions, or pre-Christian sacred sites that were absorbed into and then progressively erased by the dominant Orthodox narrative. Some even wonder whether the choice of this particular valley, with its specific configuration of water sources, mountain peaks, and forest cover, reflects a cosmological geography that predates Christianity entirely. What happened to the church complex that these ruins represent? Was it destroyed by Ottoman forces, by fire, by earthquake, or by the gradual withdrawal of resources? What manuscripts or sacred objects were preserved within these walls, and where did they go? Is there an unexcavated stratigraphy at this site that would reveal the full sequence of religious occupation? And what does the survival of St. Ivan Rilski's cult, through conquest, occupation, and the total transformation of the political world, tell us about the relationship between religious identity and national survival? The St. Ivan Rilski Church ruins stand as a testament to the extraordinary resilience of spiritual tradition, the way a community under existential pressure can invest the sites of its religious history with a significance that makes them, paradoxically, both more vulnerable and more necessary. The walls are ruined. The faith survived. The story of the Rila Valley is the story of what a people decides is worth preserving above all else. From the mountain valley of Bulgaria, we return now to the ancient landscape of Anatolia, to the ruins of one of the classical world's most magnificent religious monuments, a structure whose destruction is no less baffling than its original construction. The valley of the Hermus River, the Gediz in modern Turkish, is broad and flat and agricultural, its floor planted with cotton and tobacco, its edges climbing through terraced vineyards and olive groves toward the mountains above. The ancient city of Sardis, capital of Lydia and later of the Persian satrapy, spread across this valley at a crossing point that made it one of the most important cities in the ancient world. The city where coinage may have been invented, where Croesus, legendary for his wealth, held his court, where the Silk Road met the Aegean coast. Of all of Sardis, almost nothing remains standing. Almost nothing except two enormous columns. The Temple of Artemis at Sardis was, in the ancient world, one of the largest Greek temples ever built, ranking alongside the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, and the Temple of Apollo at Didyma as one of the colossal Ionic temples of Western Anatolia. Construction began in the 4th century BCE and continued, with interruptions, into the Roman period, the project ultimately spanning more than 6 centuries without ever reaching completion. The temple was dedicated to Artemis, the Greek goddess of the hunt, though at Sardis she was syncretically identified with the Lydian goddess Cybele and, later, with the Roman Diana. The two surviving columns, still standing to their full height of nearly 18 meters, are among the most impressive architectural survivals from the ancient world, their Ionic capitals, though damaged, still conveying the refined grandeur of the original design. What baffles architectural historians is the temple's structural paradox. 6 centuries of construction on a single religious building, yet the project was never finished. The columns were raised, the platform was built, the cellar walls were partially completed, and then, generation after generation, the work continued without conclusion. The most perplexing discovery is the physical evidence of the temple's complex structural history. Columns at different stages of completion, some with finished fluting, some with their drums still rough, some with Byzantine-era windows cut through their sides, some incorporated into a later Christian church built within the temple's unfinished walls. Was the incompleteness of the temple a failure of resources, a theological statement, or simply the natural result of a project whose ambition exceeded any realistic capacity for completion? Sardis, in the Lydian period, the 6th and 7th centuries BCE, was one of the wealthiest and most sophisticated cities in the ancient Mediterranean world. The Lydians are credited with the invention of coinage, a development of such transformative economic consequence that it effectively created the market economy of the ancient world. Their king Croesus, whose proverbial wealth gave the English language the expression "rich as Croesus," was a patron of Greek art and religion of extraordinary generosity, said to have donated the columns of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. The sanctuary at Sardis was, in the Lydian period, a place of great sacred importance, a site where the Lydian and Greek religious traditions merged into a syncretic cult that the Persians, after their conquest of Lydia in 547 BCE, were careful to accommodate rather than suppress. Some scholars propose that the temple's prolonged construction history reflects the political disruptions of the ancient world, that each invasion, conquest, or political change interrupted the building program, and that what looks like incompleteness is simply the accumulated effect of 6 centuries of historical interruption. The prevailing theory suggests that the Romans, who undertook significant new construction at the temple in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, were actually expanding and transforming a partially completed structure into something closer to their own architectural ideals. Others suggest that the unfinished temple could have been a symbolic representation of the divine's inherent incompleteness, that some ancient religious traditions understood the ongoing construction of a sacred space as itself a form of worship, the perpetual labor of building being more pleasing to the deity than the finality of completion. Perhaps this was a conduit of a different kind, not a finished vessel, but an open wound in the landscape, a permanent invitation to divine presence precisely because it was never closed. Could it be that the temple's extraordinary longevity as a construction project reflects not failure, but a specifically ancient understanding of the relationship between a sacred building and the community that builds it, that the act of building was inseparable from the act of worship, and that a completed temple would have paradoxically diminished its own sacred function? Some even wonder whether the survival of those 2 great columns, through the earthquakes, the conquests, the Christian transformation, and the subsequent millennia of neglect, is itself a kind of message, a testimony to a persistence that even incompletion could not undermine. What deity was truly being worshipped at Sardis, Artemis, Cybele, or someone older still? What prayers were spoken at the altar in front of those enormous columns? In what languages? Across what centuries? Why did the Romans choose to build a synagogue so close to the temple, the largest diaspora synagogue ever found. And what does the proximity of these two great religious structures tell us about religious life in imperial Sardis? And what lies buried beneath the temple's unfinished platform? The Temple of Artemis at Sardis stands as a testament to the strange relationship between ambition and time. The way the grandest projects outlast the intentions that created them, becoming something other than what was planned, acquiring a meaning from their incompleteness that they could never have possessed if finished. The two columns still stand. The goddess is gone. The story of Sardis is the story of what survives when everything else is taken. From the Lydian Valley of Western Turkey, we travel now east, deep into Anatolia and toward the Armenian border, where the ruins of a medieval city occupy a windswept plateau above a river gorge, a city that was once one of the largest in the world and is now entirely empty. The plateau edge drops without warning to the gorge below, and the wind that comes up from the Arpa River carries the cold of a country that has never been entirely tamed. The plain stretches in every direction, brown and grey in autumn, dusted with snow in winter, and the ruined walls of the city extend along the plateau's southern edge for more than a kilometre, their towers still rising in places to 10 and 12 metres, their gates still framing the road to nowhere that passes through them. Within the walls, silence, open space, foundations in the grass, and the standing ruins of churches, mosques, caravanserais, and palaces that constitute one of the most remarkable ghost cities on Earth. As you step through the gate of Ani, you enter a city that was once alive and is now, with an absoluteness that is vertiginous, entirely dead. Ani is a ruined medieval Armenian city located in the Kars province of eastern Turkey, occupying a naturally fortified plateau at the confluence of the Arpa River and the Bostanli stream, on the modern border between Turkey and Armenia. At its peak in the 10th and 11th centuries CE, under the Bagratid Armenian dynasty, Ani was one of the largest cities in the world, its population estimated at somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 people, making it comparable to Constantinople and larger than Paris, London, or Rome at the time. It was the capital of the Bagratid Kingdom of Armenia, a center of culture, commerce, and religion of the first rank. Its streets lined with the churches, palaces, and markets of a civilization at the height of its self-confidence. It is now one of the most complete examples of a medieval ghost city in the world, abandoned not gradually but catastrophically, its empty streets and standing monuments preserving the layout of an entire medieval urban life. What baffles historians of the medieval Caucasus is the speed and completeness of Ani's decline. The way a city of 200,000 people could go from being a thriving metropolitan center to a ghost town within a period of perhaps 2 centuries, without leaving any clear explanation in the surviving historical record. The most perplexing discovery is the degree to which the city's physical fabric, its walls, its churches, its administrative buildings, survived the abandonment in a condition suggesting not a catastrophic destruction, but a deliberate departure, as if the population had simply decided to leave and had taken their lives but left their architecture behind. The Seljuk conquest of 1064 CE, described in devastating terms by contemporary sources, may have triggered the decline, but Ani continued to be inhabited and contested for 2 centuries after this. What finally emptied it? The Bagratid Kingdom of Armenia was one of the great Christian civilizations of the medieval world, a culture of extraordinary artistic and literary achievement, whose church architecture in particular represents a tradition of formal and technical mastery that influenced the development of both Byzantine and, some scholars argue, Romanesque architecture in the West. The Cathedral of Ani, built in 1001 CE by the architect Tredat, the same man who repaired the dome of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople after the earthquake of 989 CE, is among the finest examples of medieval religious architecture anywhere in the world, its pointed arches and ribbed ceiling predating comparable developments in Gothic architecture by more than a century. Some scholars propose that Ani's decline was the result of a sequence of catastrophes rather than any single cause. The Seljuk conquest, subsequent Mongol invasions, earthquakes, and the gradual rerouting of Silk Road trade to routes that bypassed the city, combining to drain it of population over the course of the 12th and 13th centuries. The prevailing theory suggests that by the time the city was finally abandoned, its population had been declining gradually for generations, the magnificent infrastructure left standing as the community contracted around it. Others suggest that the architectural program of Ani, the extraordinary density of churches, the sophistication of the palace complex, the urban planning that is visible in the city's regular layout, could have been a symbolic representation of the New Jerusalem, the heavenly city described in the Book of Revelation, whose building in stone and mortar was understood as a participation in the eschatological project of divine history. Perhaps this was a conduit between Armenian Christian theology and the material world, a city that aspired to be not merely a human settlement, but a physical prefiguration of the divine city to come. Could it be that Ani's extraordinary architectural legacy, the pointed arches, the ribbed vaults, the structural innovations that predate their supposed Western origins, reflects a transmission of knowledge from the Armenian architectural tradition to the Romanesque and Gothic builders of Western Europe through pathways that have not been fully traced? Some even wonder whether the full extent of Ani's influence on medieval European architecture has been systematically underestimated, partly because acknowledging it would require a significant revision of the standard narrative of architectural history. Why was Ani not rebuilt or resettled after the Mongol period, when other devastated cities recovered? What happened to the 200,000 people who once lived here? Where did they go? And what did they take with them, besides their lives? Is there an underground city beneath Ani's surface, tunnels, cisterns, crypts, that has not yet been fully explored? And what does it mean to stand in a city of this scale and find it entirely, absolutely empty? Ani stands as a testament to the devastating completeness with which history can erase a civilization's living presence while leaving its architecture intact. The strange phenomenon of a city that is perfectly preserved and entirely dead. The walls stand. The city is gone. The story of Ani is the story of what remains when everything that made a place meaningful has been taken away, and of our stubborn, necessary insistence on finding meaning in the ruins nonetheless. From the haunting emptiness of Ani's medieval streets, we travel now west and north, back into the British Isles, to a very different kind of ruin, one that was built not in antiquity, but as a deliberate evocation of antiquity, and that has nonetheless accumulated a mystery of its own. The moorland stretches in every direction, golden grass and dark heather cut by the valleys of limestone streams. The sky enormous overhead, with the specific grandiosity that belongs to the upland landscapes of northern England. The air is clean and cold, scented with peat and sheep, and the silence, when the wind drops, is absolute in the way that only very open, very empty landscapes can be silent. Through a stand of oak trees, where the light shifts from open moorland to dappled shadow, a circle of standing stones appears, not the ancient weathered megaliths of Stonehenge or Avebury, but stones that are wrong somehow, too fresh, too deliberately arranged, their spacing too regular, their purpose too recently decided. And yet the atmosphere here is undeniable. The Druids' Temple, or Iltonstone Circle as it is officially known, is a folly constructed in the 1820s on a moorland estate near Masham in North Yorkshire, England. Commissioned by William Danby, a local landowner who employed workers during a period of agricultural distress to build a replica of a Neolithic monument on his land. The result is one of the most remarkable and successful architectural faux antiques in Britain. A complex of standing stones, a central altar stone, a cave, and various additional features arranged in a form clearly inspired by Stonehenge and other genuine megalithic monuments, yet executed in stone, quarried locally, and placed within living memory of the people who visit it today. Danby reportedly offered a small stipend to any hermit willing to live in the cave for 7 years to complete the atmosphere of ancient mystery. The extraordinary thing, the thing that makes this site genuinely worthy of inclusion in any discussion of ancient monuments, is that it works. What baffles visitors and cultural historians alike about the Druids' Temple is the degree to which it has, in the 2 centuries since its construction, acquired an atmosphere of genuine sacred presence. The way people feel compelled to leave offerings at its altar stone, to circle its standing stones in contemplation, to pause at the mouth of its cave with an emotion that is not easily categorized as mere aesthetic appreciation. The most perplexing discovery is the accumulation of votive offerings, flowers, candles, crystals, ribbons, personal tokens, that appears at the site regularly, suggesting that for a significant number of visitors, the Druids' Temple functions not as a historical curiosity, but as a genuinely sacred space. How does a deliberate fabrication become a real sacred site? And what does this transformation tell us about the nature of sacredness itself? The 1820s were a period of intense and somewhat turbulent interest in Britain's prehistoric past. The antiquarian tradition of the previous century, Stukely, Aubrey, Camden, had created a popular appetite for ancient monuments that was met simultaneously by genuine archaeological investigation and by a wave of romantic mysticism that projected onto prehistoric monuments a rich fantasy of druidic ceremony, bardic wisdom, and proto-Celtic spirituality that had very little to do with the actual archaeological record. Danby was a man of the Romantic period, and the Druids' Temple is a Romantic project, an attempt to create, through an act of architectural imagination, a space that would evoke the emotional and spiritual qualities that the Romantics attributed to the genuine ancient monuments they admired. Some scholars propose that the Druids' Temple's acquisition of sacred atmosphere is simply a function of its formal resemblance to genuine sacred sites, that the visual vocabulary of standing stones, whether ancient or modern, activates a psychological response in visitors who have been culturally primed to associate that vocabulary with spiritual significance. The prevailing theory suggests that the site's location in a genuinely dramatic moorland landscape, combined with its careful design and the depth of the surrounding trees, creates sensory conditions, solitude, enclosure, the smell of earth and vegetation that the human nervous system associates with the sacred, regardless of the stone's actual age. Others suggest that the Druids' Temple could be a symbolic representation of a much deeper truth about sacredness: that sacred sites are not defined by their age, but by the quality of attention and intention they receive, and that 2 centuries of visitors approaching these stones with reverence, making offerings, and seeking something beyond the ordinary have created a genuine accumulation of sacred significance that is no less real for being recent. Perhaps this was a conduit of a kind that William Danby did not anticipate, not a theatrical prop for romantic emotions, but the seed of an actual living sacred tradition. Could it be that the Druids' temple reveals something profound about the nature of all sacred sites? That the ancient monuments we revere became sacred not through their antiquity alone, but through exactly the same process now visible at this folly: the repeated acts of human attention, intention, and emotional investment that, accumulated over time, transform a place from mere geography into sacred space. Some even wonder whether the boundary between genuine and fabricated sacred sites is less meaningful than we assume, whether what we call sacredness is always in the end a human creation. Is a sacred site defined by its age, its origin, or by the quality of the experience it provides? What should we make of the offerings left at the Druids' temple by visitors who know perfectly well it was built in 1820? Does the folly reveal something true about the ancient monuments it imitates? Something about how they, too, became sacred through the same accumulation of human attention? And if a 200-year-old fabrication can become a genuine sacred space, what does that tell us about the nature of the sacred itself? The Druids' temple stands as the most unexpected and perhaps the most philosophically challenging site in this entire journey. A monument that asks not about the ancient past, but about the nature of the human impulse that reaches toward it. The stones are new. The question they ask is eternal. The story of the Druids' temple is the story of every site we have visited today, the story of human beings who look at the world and, in their need for meaning, make something holy. We have traveled today across 6 continents and 30 centuries, through desert and jungle, over mountain and moorland, into caves lit by ancient pigment, and across plateaus emptied by catastrophe. We have stood at the base of towers, built by civilizations that vanished, and at the edge of cliffs where legend and archaeology refuse to separate. We have walked through fortresses that watched empires rise and fall, temples carved into silence, and cities abandoned, yet never truly gone. From the windswept stones of Central Asia to the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, from the monumental stillness of the Nile to the hidden architectural worlds of China, from remote European ruins to sacred landscapes in the Americas, each place carried a fragment of something larger than itself. Each ruin was not just a structure, but a message, incomplete, eroded, and still reaching toward us across time. We stood before places shaped by hands we will never know. We traced patterns carved with intent we can only attempt to understand. We followed paths worn down by countless footsteps, people who lived entire lives in places that today exist only as echoes. And what have we learned? Perhaps only this: the ancient world was not simpler than ours. It was not less intelligent, not less advanced, not less imaginative. The people who built these places did not see the world as we see it. They saw connections where we see separation. They saw meaning where we see randomness. They built with a sense of permanence in a world that has never allowed anything to truly last. They looked at rock and saw doorways. They looked at mountains and saw centers of the universe. They looked at the sky and saw patterns worth building entire civilizations around. Some of what they knew has been lost. Some has been misunderstood, and some may still exist, hidden in details we have learned to ignore. The ruins you have seen are not endings. They are thresholds, places where time overlaps, where past and present briefly coexist. They remind us that history is not a closed chapter, but an ongoing presence, shaping the way we think, the questions we ask, and the limits we assume. Every site we explored left us with more uncertainty than clarity, and yet that uncertainty may be the most important part, because every unanswered question carries something forward. Who were we before history was written? What did we truly believe before belief was recorded? And what does it say about us, that we continue to search for meaning in the things they left behind? Maybe the real mystery is not in the stones themselves, but in the persistence of the questions they provoke. Because across continents and centuries, across languages and lost civilizations, one thing remains unchanged: the human need to understand where we come from and why we were here at all. The echoes of the forgotten world are not silent. They are all around us, in landscapes, in ruins, in fragments of stories that refuse to disappear. Listen carefully, and if this journey sparked even a single question in your mind, support the channel. A like helps this content reach further, and subscribing means you'll be here for what comes next. Because this is only the surface. There are deeper places, older stories, stranger questions, and we are only just beginning to uncover them.